Chapter 22:08. The surprise and transformation lasted for a few days before it ended. For Lin Feng, absorbing it for his own use, a few days was just a blink of an eye. The time needed was quite long. Floating in the world of time, in seclusion, no one disturbed him. It was very comfortable. 1 year passed, and another year passed. The energy of the time law passage was reduced by more than half. At this time, Lin Feng was completely different from before he entered the time realm. Just his talent in the laws of time was already close to the space Tao. In the black vortex, the time Tao had already entered the second stage, and even the requirements for the third stage were close to half. Most of the time energy was absorbed in those few days. Opening the valve, his body absorbed a large amount of it and stored it in his body in cells. It was also a coincidence. After that, it was the gradual transformation of the black vortex. It took a lot of time to absorb all the time energy and transform it into the most essential energy of the black vortex, thus transforming. It was like a river gradually converging into an ocean. Lin Feng's strength and combat power had improved tremendously in the past few years. The heaven and earth fruit he had obtained previously had long been in his stomach, but it was far from enough. From a god-level expert to a god-level expert, the potential of the body seemed to be endless. It needed to be developed again and again. He was not in a hurry. After all, for Lin Feng, the god-level life level had just begun. With the great leap in life level, his combat power had completely soared to a new level. Now, his combat power was comparable to a powerful top-level god. He was confident that he could defeat even a guardian god several times. Huff! After letting out a long breath, Lin Feng opened his eyes. Finally, I've improved most of it. Lin Feng smiled. He was very satisfied with the success of his cultivation. In the past few years, he had improved rapidly, as if he was sitting on a rocket. Even he was shocked. Clenching his fists, his eyes were filled with joy and confidence. With a thought, the divine patterns of light appeared, completely suppressing the dark patterns. The perfect appearance pointed to the essence of the great Tao. They were both at the fifth stage, but not only had the divine patterns of light reached the limit of the fifth stage, but they also seemed to have a soul. In comparison, the dark patterns combined with the Miyuan demonic orb were inferior. However, this was only temporary. When the 6 paths of darkness all reach 100,000 essences, the dark runes will definitely undergo an extreme transformation and enter a new level. This was a qualitative leap. It was the same for the divine runes of light and the divine runes of darkness. With his prior experience, Lin Feng naturally knew what path he should take. The refinement of the 5th Bloodfang horn had already begun, and it led straight to the 5th Grand Tao of Darkness, the Tao of Darkness. However, the refinement would not be completed in a short period of time. This place is not a land of treasures. Instead, it seems more like a place for gathering formations. After staying in this time passage for a long time and going back and forth so many times, Lin Feng had already figured out the ins and outs. However, he still didn't know how to activate the formation. Under normal circumstances, I don't think I'd be able to activate the formation. But now, there are many more possibilities. Lin Feng looked around. The originally saturated energy had been reduced by nearly half. Most of it had been incidentally absorbed when he was breaking through. The weakening of the time energy was just like the weakening of the energy sealing the gathering formation. The originally thick barrier and fog had become much thinner. It's a pity that I still can't figure it out. In the black vortex, the bloodline of the Tao of Time is only at the 2nd stage. The absorption speed is too slow. It was too far away to rely on his own bloodline to absorb it. If it was at the 3rd stage, it might be possible. After all, the efficiency was 10 times that of the 2nd stage. Moreover, his talent and senses were deeper. However, the bloodline of the Tao of Time was only at the 2nd stage. It was really ordinary. There's no hurry. Now that I've broken through, defeating the guardian spirit beast will be easy. Let's find the land of treasures first. Moreover, there might be other top-notch experts eyeing the treasures here. Lin Feng thought to himself. After finding the land of treasures and obtaining the treasures of the Tao of Time, he would slowly grasp the gathering formation of the Tao of Time. After all, the gathering formation was an opportunity. It was his fortune to obtain it, but it was his fate to lose it. In the Tao of Time, in the curtain punishment domain, a long curtain was erected in the void. It was mysterious and magnificent. When one looked closer, it was a towering palace. The changes in time made the entire palace look like a magnificent curtain. Whoosh, a white light flashed, and a fiery red figure instantly ran out. His expression was somewhat ugly. Damn it, I failed again. The flames on his body gradually extinguished, but his head was still covered in fiery red curly hair. The armor on his body was slightly damaged. Although his face looked a little disheveled, it did not reduce his masculinity. It was Bailey Jean. He had been here for a long time. He had not been to the Tao of Light. Instead, he came directly to the Tao of Time. To him, since he did not have the geographical advantage, no matter where he went, he might as well come to the Tao of Time. All the experts did not have the geographical advantage. At least it would be much fairer. Moreover, the more dangerous and difficult the place was, the fewer experts there would be. He did not have much competition in the Tao of Light. He might as well come here and take a gamble. There might be more opportunities. His choice was correct. Bailey Jean looked carefree, but he was actually quite smart and talented. Otherwise, the inheritance of the heavenly road would not have fallen on him. However, his starting point was too low, and he was not that good at the Tao of Time. Although he had improved here, the improvement was not obvious. Until now, Bailey Jean was still only a high-level god. He was only slightly stronger than Dong Wang. He could not even defeat the Guardian of the Tao of Light, let alone the Guardian of the Tao of Time. According to Bailey Jin's wishes, he still wanted to try his luck. He would first take the treasure of the Tao of Time and see if it was of any use. However, after hundreds of years, he had tried countless times to defeat the Guardian Spirit Beast, but he was still not its match. If the difference in strength was not big, he might be able to make up for it with his skills and experience. However, when the difference in strength was too big, he could not make up for it no matter how hard he tried. It seems that I don't have this life. Bailey Jean shook his head and sighed helplessly. He had a clear understanding of his own strength. He knew very well that defeating the Guardian Spirit Beast was not something that could be done overnight. By the time he had such strength, the third reincarnation would have ended long ago. Obtaining the inheritance could help him pass through the initial stages faster. However, he still had to cultivate step by step after that. It was impossible for him to succeed in one go. At most, he had a higher vision than the other strong cultivators and could see further into the future. He was about to sit cross-legged and recover his strength. Suddenly, a light flashed in front of him. Bailey Jin's eyes lit up. He turned his head and sensed a familiar aura. Swoosh! The person was extremely fast. In an instant, he stopped in front of him with a smile on his face. Brother Lin. Bailey Jean widened his eyes in surprise. Long time no see, Brother Bailey. With a smile on his face, the person was Lin Feng. Chapter 2209. 90% of the Time world had already been explored. To Lin Feng, he only had to explore the remaining 10%, and finding the location of the treasure could be said to be a matter of course, and it was naturally as easy as blowing off dust. However, he did not expect to meet Bailey Jean here. He was quite lucky. I thought you were eliminated, Lin Feng said with a smile. According to his previous thoughts, if Bailey she hadn't been eliminated and there were only 2 spots left in the one side world, he would have chosen the light side world, which had a lower difficulty. However, he didn't expect that he would do the opposite and seek a chance of survival in the time side world. Thinking about it carefully, his choice was actually very wise. Bah, what are you talking about? How can I, Bailey Jean, be eliminated so easily? Bailey Jean sneered, but his old face turned red. He recalled how he had been beaten to a pulp in the time world. It was truly inhumane. Fortunately, his escaping ability was extremely outstanding, and the other party was not interested in chasing after him. Although he was not strong, he had at least kept his life. Lin Feng saw this and smiled knowingly. He then changed the topic. How long have you been here? Not long, a few hundred years. Bailey Jean looked at the long curtain in front of him. His eyes flashed, and he sighed softly. However, I'm prepared to give up. This guardian spirit beast is too strong. It's several levels lower than it. Oh, Lin Feng followed Bailey Jin's gaze. The long curtain palace looked very strange. The time energy was spinning very chaotically, as if it contained the chaotic laws of time. Although he had not cultivated any laws of time, his bloodline talent had grown, and his vision had improved a lot. Bailey Jean said, "Brother Lin, it seems like you're here for this too. You must be careful. This guardian spirit beast is stronger than ordinary top-notch experts. Moreover, the time in the palace is chaotic. It's a headache. In addition, we're not proficient in the time Tao, so our combat strength here is much weaker. Brother Lin, remember not to go too deep when you enter for the first time. Also lock the exit tightly. Don't let the chaotic time blur your senses." Lin Feng nodded and smiled. "Thank you for your reminder, Brother Bailey." To be able to tell him in such detail without hiding anything, it was enough to show Bailey Jin's true nature. It was not in vain to know him. "Then I'll go in," Lin Feng said. "Ah, so fast." Bailey Jin was stunned. Lin Feng smiled. Without saying anything, he turned into a streak of light and entered the long curtain palace. Hua! His figure disappeared, leaving as soon as he said so. Bailey Jean could not help but laugh. Brother Lin is really impatient. It seems like you're also very eager for treasures. However, this guardian spiritual beast isn't easy to deal with. Although Brother Lin is stronger than me, it won't be easy for you to get past it. Bailey Jean sighed as he recalled the battles with the guardian spirit beasts over the past few hundred years. He had been defeated time and time again, narrowly escaping death. He no longer had any confidence. Bailey Jean let out a long breath and calmed his mind. His gaze landed on the curtain palace. He was a little absent-minded and didn't know what he was thinking. At this moment, a beam of light flashed and streaked across the void. Bailey Jean could not help but widen his eyes. "He's out? Brother Lin." Bailey Jin's figure flashed and arrived in front of Lin Feng. He was slightly worried, but Lin Feng's aura was still calm, as if he was not injured. "Brother Lin, you're too anxious. I didn't have time to tell you about the characteristics of that guardian spiritual beast and its attacking methods before you went in. Fortunately, you're not injured. Otherwise, I wouldn't feel at ease." Bailey Jean said from the bottom of his heart. Lin Feng smiled. "I'm fine. It's good that you're fine." Bailey Jean said, "Come, Brother Lin, rest well. I'll tell you some of my experiences over the past few hundred years later. With your strength and experience, you'll definitely have a better chance than me. There's no need to trouble yourself, Brother Bailey. I appreciate your kindness," Lin Feng said. "We're all brothers. There's no need to be so polite." Bailey Jean waved his hand. "There's no need to be so wishy-washy. Everything is for the sake of passing the third reincarnation. I don't have much hope, but you definitely can, Brother Lin." Lin Feng's heart warmed. He smiled and said, "There's really no need, Brother Bailey. I've already taken out the treasure." Bailey Jean was stunned. He looked at Lin Feng in shock and widened his eyes. "You've taken out the treasure?" Turning his head, Bailey Jean looked at the long curtain palace. At this moment, the chaotic time energy surrounding the long curtain palace no longer existed. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. Bailey Jean suddenly stopped and took a deep breath. "It can't be," Bailey Jean muttered in disbelief. After all, the guardian deity was much more powerful than an ordinary top-tier deity. Among all the experts in the reincarnation of destiny, the number of people who could defeat it could be counted on one hand. Moreover, Lin Feng had only entered in the blink of an eye. It was too terrifying. "Brother Lin, are you serious?" Bailey Jean still felt like he was in a dream. Lin Feng's hand flashed, and he instantly took out a strange bell-like treasure. It was wrapped in a faint layer of time energy, just like the time energy outside the long curtain palace. It was a special white material, and one could tell at a glance that it was extraordinary. A time-type pinnacle true treasure that contains the chaotic laws of time. Lin Feng gently shook the white bell. The soft vibration caused a slight change in the surrounding time, but no special energy appeared. I haven't fused with it yet. Lin Feng smiled and said to Bailey Jean, so it can't unleash its power for the time being. Bailey Jean stared at the white bell in a daze. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat as he looked at Lin Feng in shock. Brother Lin, you can fuse with a time-type pinnacle true treasure. Lin Feng pursed his lips and nodded. I should be able to. Should be. Bailey Jean and Lin Feng had not just met. He knew Lin Feng's personality very well. If he was not 90% confident, Lin Feng would not have said the word should be. He dared to say that because he was so confident. What did it mean to be compatible with a time-type pinnacle true treasure? Lin Feng's time talent and nomological cultivation were definitely not ordinary. Bailey Jin's heart trembled violently. After a long time, he let out a long sigh of relief and looked at Lin Feng. Brother Lin, you've really shown me what a true genius is. He was convinced. Bailey Jean had treated Lin Feng as a good brother before, but he had also treated him as a competitor. He was proud and arrogant to begin with, so he would not easily submit to others. With the inheritance of Heaven's Road, Bailey Jean had the right to be arrogant. He did not even care about the strongest person on the Origin Awakening list, Yin Fagia. As long as he was given enough time, he would definitely surpass Yin Fagia and be stronger than him. But now, Bailey Jean was really convinced. Lin Feng was younger than him, and his life level was lower than his. However, regardless of combat strength or talent, he was terrifying. He was far ahead of him. You're really powerful, Brother Lin. Looking at Lin Feng, Bailey Jean gave him a thumbs up. Chapter 22:10. Lin Feng could see a lot from Bailey Jin's eyes. He smiled and did not say anything. Excessive modesty was arrogance. The current him indeed had enough strength. A mere guardian spirit beast would not be able to stop him. By the way, Brother Bailey, before you entered this place, did any other experts beat you to it? Lin Feng asked. I'm not very sure either, Bailey Jean said. In any case, I've been here for hundreds of years. Other than exploring this world, I've stayed here to confront that guardian spirit beast. It's only now that I've seen you, Lin Feng. Lin Feng was deep in thought. Then, did you find any heaven and earth fruits? Bailey Jean was slightly surprised before laughing out loud. Brother Lin, you've asked the right person. Oh, Lin Feng's eyes lit up. Bailey Jean narrowed his eyes and revealed a meaningful smile. He raised his eyebrows. I won't say anything about the others, but more than half of the heaven and earth fruits here are in my pocket. As expected, Lin Feng revealed a smile. Brother Bailey, what a good opportunity. I wonder if you can part with these heaven and earth fruits and give them to me. I'll definitely reward you handsomely. Bailey Jean was slightly stunned. He looked straight at Lin Feng. Urgently? Yes, urgently. Lin Feng did not hide it. Ordinary heaven and earth fruits only had the effect of strengthening his physique. However, the heaven and earth fruits contained rich time energy. It was killing two birds with one stone and could not be found anywhere else. Right now, he urgently needed time energy. Moreover, it could strengthen his physique. It was something that could only be encountered by chance. It's just a matter of words. Bailey Jean waved his hand, and the ground in front of him was instantly filled with heaven and earth fruits. They're all here. Brother Lin, you could take as many as you want. There's no harm in taking them all. To Bailey Jean, although these heaven and earth fruits were precious, they were not of much help to him at the moment. They were more for sale. Since his good brother needed them urgently, he naturally would not keep them to himself. Money was not important, and brotherhood could not be bought with money. Lin Feng's gaze swept over them, and he was greatly moved. The time-type fruits of heaven and earth on the ground could not only greatly strengthen his newly evolved physique, but they were also enough to feed the Black Vortex. It would not be a problem for him to upgrade his time Dao bloodline from the second stage to the third stage. Then I'll shamelessly accept it. Lin Feng wasn't an indecisive person. With a wave of his hand, he kept all the fruits of heaven and earth into his bag. In the next instant, a pair of spatial energy bracelets appeared, and he tossed them towards Bailey Jean. Pinnacle True Treasure, Qian Kuan ring, Lin Feng said. Bailey Jean took it, and his expression changed slightly. It's too precious, Brother Lin. Naturally, he knew the price of a pinnacle true treasure. It was more than twice as valuable as the fruits of heaven and earth he had taken out, especially since this pinnacle true treasure was of the space element. Lin Feng smiled. This pinnacle true treasure is not as valuable as these fruits of heaven and earth. To him, it was worth it even if he could only exchange this set of Qian Kuan ring for a small portion of the time-type fruits of heaven and earth. His talent in space was not outstanding, and he had too many pinnacle true treasures of the moment. He did not have enough time to cultivate with this set of Qian Kuan ring. Moreover, this set of pinnacle true treasures was only elementary, so it was not very practical. When he fought with Thorn, he knew its power very well. It could be used, but it was not very practical. Bailey Jean hesitated for a moment. The Qian Kuan ring was heavy in his hand. It was a pinnacle true treasure. Any one of them in Origin Awakened Continent was enough to make all the experts go crazy. All right, Lin Feng patted Bailey Jin's shoulder and said with a smile, "Speaking of which, I took advantage of you. I just took a pinnacle time-type true treasure." Bailey Jin's expression turned serious as he shook his head. "You can't say that. I don't have the ability to defeat this guardian spirit beast. Brother Lin, you're the real deal. Treasures should be taken by the capable. So, take this set of Qian Kuan ring." Lin Feng smiled. "Everyone takes what they need. It can't be better. There won't be any burden in each other's hearts." Bailey Jean said helplessly, "Since Brother Lin says so, I can only accept it shamelessly." After accepting the Qian Kuan ring, Bailey Jean said, "Brother Lin, what are your plans next?" "I'll cultivate here for a while and see if there are any opportunities. Then, I'll go find the guardian god to get a slot," Lin Feng said in a low voice. Bailey Jean smiled bitterly. Find a guardian god to get a slot? Only Lin Feng dared to say that. After the strength of the other top experts was weakened here, none of them dared to say such nonsense. The strength of the guardian god here was comparable to a powerful top god, or even stronger. "Brother Lin, you can cultivate in peace. No one can take the slot here except for you," Bailey Jean said. "I'm preparing to return to the light side. With the Qian Kuan ring, a pinnacle true treasure, and the blazing lotus, there might be a chance of survival." Lin Feng nodded. If the two pinnacle true treasures complemented each other well, coupled with Bailey Jin's own inheritance and ability, it was indeed possible for him to challenge Yan Fajie. However, it was only a possibility. He knew Yan Fajie's strength very well. "Then I wish you good luck." Lin Feng reached out and shook Bailey Jin's hand tightly. "I hope to see you in the fourth reincarnation, Brother Bailey." Who knows? Bailey Jin's eyes were also filled with ambition. A soldier who did not want to be a general was not a good soldier. No matter what, as long as there was a glimmer of hope, he would fight for it. The two of them parted ways. Bailey Jean returned to the light side and reconsidered the advancement slot. Lin Feng returned to the strange time passage and cultivated again. Just as Bailey Jean said, Lin Feng was not afraid of other experts snatching the time slot before him, because no one could do it. He could take it slow and focus on improving his strength. "With this batch of heaven and earth fruits, my black vortex time bloodline will soon be able to reach the third stage, comparable to the space bloodline." Lin Feng was looking forward to it. From a second stage of his time bloodline, it should be similar to the space bloodline talent. When both reached the third stage, the absorption of the time energy in the time passage would be much faster. As the time energy gradually dissipated, the secret in the passage would definitely be revealed. At that time, a miracle might happen. Let's improve the bloodline first. Lin Feng refined the time-type heaven and earth fruit. Apart from a large amount of time energy, it also strengthened his physique and made up for the gap in his body's potential. The stronger the foundation, the better. 10 years. Another 10 years. Time flew. At Lin Feng's strength, the strengthening of his physique and energy absorption took a long time. The heaven and earth fruit provided by Bailey Jean was undoubtedly a timely rain. It allowed him to improve in both aspects and improve greatly. In just 50 years, not only did his time bloodline reach the third stage, but his body was also nearly one-third full. Chapter 22:11. Soon, in another 30 years, I will be able to refine and absorb all the fruits of heaven and earth. Lin Feng rapidly absorbed the time energy. Although the time bloodline in the black vortex had reached the third stage, it was still far from the space bloodline that had reached the peak of the third stage. One was already the limit, and the other was just a step away. Hiss! Streams of time energy were sucked in like raindrops. The time energy in this strange time passage was decreasing every day. Although it wasn't decreasing by much, because he had opened the valve last time, it had already absorbed nearly half of its energy. Now, every time it decreased, it became more prominent. Vaguely, the hidden fog seemed to be pushed aside, and it gradually became clear. 32 years later. Whoosh! The last bit of energy turned into nothingness, and the time energy around Lin Feng dissipated. He opened his eyes, and a light flashed. Lin Feng sighed and stood up. Very good. He clenched his fists and felt the strength in his body. In just 80 years, more than half of it had been saturated. The strengthening of his physique was only at the beginning, and it was already 50% complete. Lin Feng was very satisfied. At the same time, the time bloodline in the black vortex had been completely activated, and it was on par with the space bloodline. It was like a two-headed carriage, increasing the possibility and potential of cultivation. However, it only adds one more possibility to improve the support and life level. Lin Feng stretched his body, and his whole body felt comfortable. His cultivation path would not change. The light and darkness talent of his ancestors' bloodline was already better than time and space talent. After the fusion, it was even more powerful. His bloodline talent could be said to be the peak. Otherwise, how could he have the strength of a powerful god when he had just entered the god level with only the fourth or fifth stage bloodline? It was difficult to improve a strong bloodline, but its power was extraordinary. Well, now that I have improved a lot in all aspects, I can try to explore this place again. Lin Feng looked around and restarted the search of the time passage. Compared to 80 years ago, he was naturally different now. Sublimation in all aspects might allow him to discover the secret of the formation. But even if he could not find the secret of opening the formation, Lin Feng had a plan in his heart. It was time to leave. After all, forming the formation depended on luck, and a part of luck was luck. It wasn't something that could be obtained just because one wanted to. Right now, he was almost in his best condition. If he couldn't activate the formation now, there was no need to waste any more time and energy. There was a time limit to the reincarnation of the heavens. He also had a time limit. Whoosh! Whoosh! Lin Feng flew back and forth in the time tunnel with strange light. He didn't let go of any possibility. He was extremely focused as he searched for the secrets of this world that he had long locked onto. He was sure that the gathering array was here. However, he didn't know how to activate it or what the specific conditions were. He had no clue at all. 10 days, 30 days, 50 days. Lin Feng gave himself a time limit of 100 days. If he couldn't find it within 100 days, the chances of finding it later would be very slim. Right now, the membrane of the time passage was indeed very thin, and the blocking effect was much weaker. But in the end, his time talent was still very ordinary, even if his bloodline was already at the third stage of the black vortex. Just like his space talent, not to mention the third stage limit, even the fourth stage limit was just an average level among the experts of the heavens. Right now, instead of relying on his time talent to search, it was better to say that he was relying on his soul power and sixth sense. The main reason was that this passage absorbed a lot of time energy, so there was a little chance. The 80th day. It should be here. After confirming dozens of times, Lin Feng finally stopped. His soul power and sixth sense told him that this place was extremely special. The shining light spots were as beautiful as the stars in the sky, forming a star map. The surrounding energy gathered and scattered, full of mystery. But he couldn't understand it at all. Is it the time law? Lin Feng looked again and again, but he wasn't sure. After all, he hadn't really comprehended the time law, so he didn't know the mysteries of the time law. Looking at the scattered layout, it seemed like it wasn't, but it seemed like it wasn't. Forget it. Lin Feng was helpless. Even if he comprehended the time law now, it was too late. Since his sixth sense and soul power both pointed to this place, then it was right. If there was an opportunity, then there was. If there wasn't, then there was nothing he could do. The black vortex moved rapidly. Lin Feng's eyes lit up, and his soul power burst out. In an instant, his hands slapped the land full of stars. Endless time, energy rushed out like a tide, as if he was using actual combat to hone his saber skills. Lin Feng was also using actual attacks to find the location. His sixth sense could only sense a rough area. The rest depended on his luck. My luck has been so bad. It's time to change it. Lin Feng pursed his lips tightly. His mind was completely focused, and he clearly sensed every magical part of this land. It was as if he was in a star map. The time law was vague and clear. It was far away, but it seemed to be within reach. Everything changed with the influx of time energy. Not here. Lin Feng instantly judged and changed his position. The time energy consumption was huge. Every time he comprehended the star map, he would absorb the time energy like a whale swallowing a whale. Fortunately, his time bloodline had reached the third stage, and the black vortex had the storage ability, so he had so much. If it were other top gods, no matter how strong their time talent was, they wouldn't have so much time energy. Not here. Not here either. It's even more vague. I understand. In the experiment, Lin Feng gradually figured out the pattern. The clearer the comprehension, the closer he was to the center of the gathering array, and vice versa. It was impossible to absorb time energy continuously. Lin Feng didn't have so much time. This time energy was gathered from more than half a day's worth of fruits. If he cultivated and absorbed it by himself, how long would it take? At most, I have 3 more chances. Lin Feng felt that the black vortex was empty. It was completely different from the beginning. His figure flashed and went straight to an area 15 meters to the right. The feeling was very clear, as if it was close, but it still wasn't. Over there, Lin Feng made a prompt decision and reduced the consumption of time energy to the minimum. He moved less than 4 meters to the left, moving completely based on his feelings. But this time, his body was a little strange and different. It was as if he was attracted by something and fixed in place for a moment. This is the place. Lin Feng descended from above, his eyes shining brightly. Time energy gushed out from his right hand. Endless energy enveloped the whole land like fireworks, and all the stars shone brightly. Rumble. The starlight was bright, and the gathering array was activated. Chapter 22:12. With his experience in the dark side, Lin Feng was no stranger to the gathering array. As the name suggested, the gathering array was a spiritual energy gathering array. It gathered 80% of the spiritual energy of a world. The gathering array was the 10-directional treasure gathering array that was specially designed for weaker martial artists. If one had the opportunity, they would be able to improve their strength. Countless stars shone, and the entire time passage changed instantly. Golden light mixed with white light pillars shot into the sky like a fountain, forming a magnificent spectacle that merged with heaven and earth. It's finally activated. Lin Feng stood on the spot and smiled. He was lucky. If he tried 2 more times, his time energy would be exhausted. It would take a long time for him to gather enough energy to sense it once. For cultivators with high time talent and ability, they might be able to sense the precise location 2 or 3 times, but he couldn't do it. Fortunately, the result was the same. The gathering array on the side of time was finally activated by him. Every star was like a human acupuncture point, and the time energy was like blood and bones connecting the entire body. Where he was standing was the core of the gathering array, and also the only switch. Activating the gathering array, he gathered the time energy. Is this considered the conservation of moral quality? Lin Feng smiled and felt the majestic time energy around him gathering from all directions. The energy that he activated the gathering array was like a fire that lit up the entire furnace. As the gathering array was activated, the surroundings gradually became blurry, and the sensing force became stronger. The black vortex moved excitedly, absorbing the time energy at an extremely fast speed. The absorption speed of the time energy depended on the grade of the black vortex's time path and the density of the time energy. Right now, it was operating at full capacity. Wah! Lin Feng sat down cross-legged and began to cultivate. The position he was at was not only the core of the gathering array, but also the center of the energy gathering. There was no danger, so it was naturally the best. There was no need to waste energy looking for it. The black vortex began to absorb the time energy at 300% efficiency, or even more. The energy was too majestic. It was almost forced in. The black vortex was rapidly transforming every day. Soon, it had crossed the initial stage of the third stage. It was like a speeding train, increasing at an astonishing speed. 30%, 60%, 90%. When he first entered the third stage, his bloodline was far inferior to the Space Tao. But now, his bloodline of the Time Tao had caught up with the Space Tao. The mystical power of the gathering formation was undeniable. However, this was only a quantitative accumulation. Lin Feng's attainments in the laws of time were still zero. But for bloodlines, realms, and whatnot didn't matter. The key was the existence of quantity. 100%. Time energy was fully absorbed. Space energy had already reached a bottleneck, but it was still unable to break through to the fourth stage. Lin Feng had always thought that it was because the spatial energy was not dense enough, but when the time energy reached 100%, he realized the reason. Solitary yin does not grow. Solitary yang does not grow. The reason the black whirlpool could act as a medium between the light and darkness bloodlines and maintain the balance was because it was a perfect existence. Combining the laws of space and time, the black vortex was not only perfect, but it was also not inferior to the light and darkness bloodlines. The reason why his space bloodline could not evolve to the fourth stage was because it had already reached its limit. It was like a rope. When one end was pulled up, the height would always be limited because the other end of the rope was still below. But now, the rope below was also pulled up, and the rope above was naturally easy to break through. Space and time intertwined, forming an extreme resonance. Like yin and yang, they merged perfectly into one, forming the true body of the black vortex. It was like water and milk returning to its original state. There was no distinction between them. Great transformation. After returning to nature, the black vortex revealed its true form. Time and space merged into one, forming the perfect core of the vortex. It was like a singularity. Even the strongest power in the world would not be able to destroy it. The absorption of time energy did not stop. But now, it was absorbed by the black vortex, and there was no distinction between the time and space bloodlines. It was a perfect whole. The two merged. It was not the fusion of their own accord, but the black vortex itself, like two magnets gluing together naturally. Although the space and time bloodlines were inferior to the light and darkness bloodlines individually, after merging, it was far superior. Bloodline, great transformation. So clear. Lin Feng could clearly feel the energy of time dancing around him. This kind of perception wasn't inferior to the light divine rune and the darkness divine rune. It was only the fourth stage, but the light and darkness runes were already at the fifth stage. Crazy. Lin Feng himself could not describe the joys and sorrows. He was pleasantly surprised and hesitant. His bloodline had been inherited from his ancestor, and he had originally walked the path of his ancestor's light and darkness fusion, cultivating the myriad heaven path. Now another path had appeared. Space and time. Lin Feng found it inconceivable. They merged naturally, as if they were one. The coexistence of two types of Empyrean laws was indeed terrifying, but the difficulty of cultivating it was probably much higher than the fusion of light and darkness. I'll take it one step at a time. Lin Feng's thoughts were very complicated. He calmed down and slowly absorbed the huge amount of time energy, absorbing it at a speed 100 times faster than before. After the transformation, the black vortex was completely different. It was no longer a vassal of the light and darkness bloodlines, but a perfect and independent existence, like a deep primitive black hole at the beginning of the universe. The energy of the gathering formation was huge. Gathering a world of time, a total of 80% of the energy was considered extreme. In Lin Feng's opinion, there was even hope for the black vortex to advance from the fourth stage to the limit, or even break through to the fifth stage. But he was wrong. He was ridiculously wrong. Not even 20%. When the gathering formation absorbed most of the energy, Lin Feng discovered the strangeness of the black vortex. After the perfect transformation of the fourth stage and the formation of a tiny primitive black hole, its appetite became extremely huge. It swallowed all the time energy silently, taking up less than 20% of the total. Lin Feng smiled bitterly. The energy required for the fourth stage of the black vortex to advance was comparable to the fifth stage of the light and darkness runes added together. It was too difficult to break through and advance. No pain, no gain. This is the bloodline. The harder it is to advance, the more powerful it is. Now that I have such an extreme bloodline, I should feel lucky. Time and space energy are not difficult to find. After entering the universe, there will be many ways. Even if it is difficult to advance, the upper limit will definitely be higher and even surpass the ancestors Wan Qian Dao. Lin Feng's eyes lit up. Ancestor Wan Qian had only cultivated to the limit of the heavenly Dao, but he had not broken through the Dao. But now he had a path. Not only could he reach the limit of the heavenly Dao, but he could even break through the heavenly Dao and truly transcend. Chapter 22:13. The Tao of space and the Tao of time naturally merged together. Although it wasn't perfect, just like the talents of special life forms, the starting point was already very high. With a little bit of practice, it could unleash great power. The only downside was that it was very passive. It was different from cultivating Wan Qian Dao's 9 heavens of light and darkness. After merging space Dao and time Dao, it wasn't easy to cultivate them again. One had to start from the basics and build a solid foundation to understand the essence. Today's fusion was almost equivalent to the 7th stage of basic fusion, become one. This was only the starting point. As it was a fusion of celestial laws, it was even better than the fusion of light and darkness. Time and space were originally one, so there wasn't much repulsion between them. This was especially obvious when controlling true treasures. Schwa, the white bell in his hand, made a light sound, containing some joy and naturalness. The feeling of compatibility was better than before, making Lin Feng's heart beat faster. It could definitely help him. Now, there was less than 10% of the formation energy left. The reduction of time energy directly weakened the Guardian's power. Plus, his own black whirlpool had advanced, so both his combat power and power had increased. Defeating the Guardian would be easy, but he didn't want to leave like this. Anyway, it was already late. He might as well stay until the end. Opportunities didn't come often. Not every reincarnation was like the 3rd reincarnation, where there was enough time. Since there was a chance, he would naturally increase his combat power to the maximum. 3 Soul Heavenly Bell. Messages appeared in Lin Feng's mind, and he quickly absorbed them. Like a normal pinnacle true treasure, it had 3 abilities, but it wasn't easy to cultivate. 3 types of time laws corresponded to 3 types of abilities. To unleash the abilities, one had to understand the corresponding time laws. Human Soul Heavenly Time Chaos Law affects consciousness, destroys mental state, restrains domain. Earth Soul Heavenly Time Shattering Law directly affects the physical body, pure offensive ability. Strongest ability, Heavenly Soul Heavenly Time Stop Law affects the soul, auxiliary, and offensive ability, a move that destroys everything. Use it carefully. 3 abilities, each stronger than the other. Human soul heavenly belonged to the auxiliary type of ability, involving all aspects. It could be said to be a multifaceted auxiliary. He had tried the time chaos law in the treasure land just now, and it was very effective on warriors with weak minds. Not to mention, it could also destroy one's mental state and restrain one's domain. All supreme treasures are about the same. The first ability is usually the most practical and even the most useful. Lin Feng was very satisfied with the effects of the three-soul heavenly bell. He had great confidence in comprehending the temporal chaos law. After all, this was the first of the three abilities, and it was the least difficult to comprehend. Furthermore, he was on the side of time. He had the geographical advantage and pinnacle true treasures to assist him in his cultivation. The second ability, Earth Soul, is not of much help to me. I don't lack direct attack abilities. Now that time was precious. He naturally couldn't waste it to improve an ability that wasn't of much help to his combat strength. Although it was very powerful, and its direct attacks were simpler and more direct than human Hanyao's, it was still very powerful. However, it varies from person to person. The third ability is the strongest ability. It's also the most helpful to me, increasing my battle prowess the most. Lin Feng nodded inwardly. Because of the existence of the Kuan Spirit Heart Arrow, his soul attack ability was extremely powerful. Tianhun not only had the ability to attack directly, but also had the ability to assist. To him, the assisting effect was naturally the most effective. Since it was compatible with the Kuan Spirit Heart Arrow, its power was simply terrifying. Moreover, it avoided the drawbacks of destroying everything indiscriminately. It was the best way to take the essence and discard the dregs. However, the time-stop law was obscure and difficult to comprehend. First, I'll cultivate the temporal chaos law. From easy to difficult, whether it's the law or the control of pinnacle true treasures, it's the right order. Lin Feng thought for a while and made a decision. Everything was difficult at the beginning. He should start with the first ability. Originally, the first ability, Human Hunyao, was very useful to him. He focused on the path of light and darkness fusion and close combat strength. What he needed the most wasn't direct attack abilities, but auxiliary abilities. In this aspect, the three-soul heavenly bell could be said to be perfect. It was exactly what he wanted. Time flew. In the blink of an eye, a few hundred years had passed since Lin Feng entered the side of time. The third reincarnation was coming to an end. Yin Fa Jian naturally abided by the 500-year agreement, but Lin Feng didn't come. With Dong Huang's rumors, Yin Fa Jie didn't hesitate and easily defeated the Guardian to enter the fourth reincarnation. Bailey Jin, who came later, couldn't shake Yin Fa Jie. Wu Tongshan was strong enough, but his potential was not as good as Yin Fa Jie's. Bailey Jin's potential was better, but his cultivation time was too short. The older, the wiser. Yin Fa Jie could obtain the inheritance in Heaven Road, so he was not ordinary. It was normal for Bailey Jin to lose to him. As for Lin Feng, the only one who could shake Yin Fa Jie, he chose to give up, because he had a better choice. Is it going to end in 100 years? Lin Feng opened his eyes and couldn't help but sigh. The third reincarnation wasn't limitless, but it gave him so much time. He had already earned it. I've comprehended the temporal chaos law. I've also mastered the first ability of the three-soul heavenly bell. The time-stop law is still too difficult. Lin Feng sighed softly. 200 years ago, he had already grasped the mortal soul law, but he still hadn't gotten started. The difficulty of comprehending the time-stop law was much higher than the temporal chaos law. No matter how talented he was, he couldn't do it overnight. However, strictly speaking, such a speed of comprehension was already very terrifying. Lin Feng knew very well that if he didn't have the geographical advantage and a bloodline like the Black Vortex, he wouldn't be able to comprehend the temporal chaos law even if he was given tens of thousands of years, let alone a few hundred years. After all, this was a heaven-rank law. If it was so easy, there wouldn't be so few deity experts. There's still 100 years. I can still advance a little more. Lin Feng closed his eyes again. He was 100% confident in defeating the Guardian, and he wasn't afraid of any experts fighting over it. He had to make good use of the remaining 100 years. After all, this was a wandering planet. If he missed this village, he wouldn't have this hall. If he had to comprehend the temporal law elsewhere, the difficulty was more than 10 million times. 66 years later. Phew, Lin Feng let out a light breath and revealed a smile. The tighter the time limit, the greater the pressure, and the faster the cultivation and comprehension. In the last 10 years, he seemed to have been squeezed dry of his potential. He forcefully enlightened himself and crossed the threshold of the time-stop law, entering the small success stage. At least I'm at the entry level. As for the rest, even if I'm not here, I can still comprehend it in other places, as long as there's time energy. Lin Feng left the formation and headed to the exit. The remaining 34 years were enough for him to reach his destination. As for defeating the Guardian, there was no difficulty. Chapter 22:14. The mountain peak was steep, and endless space energy gathered. Bright crystal engravings connected into a line, shining with the ultimate charm of nature. The sky was high, as if an invisible hand was controlling everything. This was the crystal peak that the first reincarnation had climbed. At this time, all the outstanding great beings were gathered on the peak, floating in the void. Every great being was surrounded by a thick and transparent space light beam, like a light pillar standing at the top. There were 9 of them. The light pillars were thick and thin, long and short. Even the aura couldn't penetrate the light pillars to find any clues. The 9 pillars of light enveloped the 9 superpower houses, and they watched the crystal peak as if they were spectators. Among them, the thickest and longest pillar of light was a man with his arms crossed and his eyes closed. He looked like a human, with a green face and thin hair. His nose was high, and his lips were tightly pursed. There were 2 curved golden bull horns on his head. Yin and Yang were born together, containing the Tao of heaven and earth, the ultimate mystery. He was wearing black battle armor and boots, and his shoulders were covered with black pauldrons. It was a set of pinnacle true treasures. Even with his eyes closed and his aura covered by the light pillars, he had a domineering aura. The 8 great beings around him only dared to take a peek. None of them dared to look at him directly. He was the only pinnacle god spirit in the god-fallen world, and the strongest on the entire wandering planet. A special life form bastard, starting from Hunk. The other 8 experts started clockwise. From thick to thin, from long to short, there were the Diamond Empress, Wu Haodi, Lu Gong, Lei Mozi, Wu Tongya, Tiku Wu Daiwang, and Yen Fa. Except for Lei Mozi, who was an ultimate high-tier god spirit, the rest were top-tier gods. There were even 2 ultimate top-tier gods, Diamond Queen and Tiku. Since the first reincarnation, the 2 of them had an absolute advantage, leading the other great beings. Now, at the 4th reincarnation, they were still superior. However, compared to Bastard, they were still slightly inferior. The 9 great beings gathered as if they were waiting for something. The 9 light pillars formed a circle, and there was only one position left. Hua! The space vibrated violently, and a bright light lit up. The 8 great beings' eyes all lit up. Only Bastard remained calm with his eyes closed, as if it had nothing to do with him. Whoosh! A weak aura descended, and a tiny figure entered the eyes of all the experts. They were all stunned. Wu Haodi and Yin Fa looked surprised. Wu Haodi squinted his eyes and rubbed his fingers. Killing intent flashed in his eyes. Yin Fa smiled knowingly as if he had expected this. He smiled and nodded at the newcomer. Lin Feng replied with a smile. Lin Feng's gaze swept across the crowd and landed on Wu Hao. Their eyes met, and Lin Feng could clearly see the resolute killing intent in Wu Hao's eyes. He would not rest until he was dead. I didn't think they would all be here. Lin Feng was very curious about the 4th reincarnation. In the end, it stopped at the Bastard. That arrogant and domineering man was like an emperor, looking down on everyone. Looking at him from afar, one could feel that he was extraordinary. He was much stronger than the other experts. He's the one and only pinnacle deity, the special life form that even the wandering planets are certain of? Asshole. Lin Feng could not help but size him up a few more times. Suddenly, slap. As if dissatisfied with Lin Feng's gaze, Asshole, who had his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. Like a sleeping lion waking up, his gaze was sharp and piercing straight into one's soul, flashing with terrifying light. Lu Gong, Lei Manzi, and the other experts all trembled and were instinctively afraid. Wu Tongya and Tsung Butterfly Phoenix also frowned slightly, their bodies unnaturally tense. Only Lin Feng remained the same, looking at Asshole in the eyes. Although Asshole was strong, he was not invincible. Lin Feng knew very well that there were still 3 reincarnations, and he still had hope. Before entering the Heavenly Path reincarnation, how could he have known that his combat strength had reached the level of a top-tier deity? Apart from Hun Cheng, who was not a match for him, the Diamond Empress and Tiku, who were only slightly stronger than him, could be a match for the rest of the experts. What is the 4th reincarnation testing? Lin Feng was even more curious. He had thought that after the 3rd reincarnation, he would directly enter the 4th reincarnation, but he did not expect that all the experts had gathered together, seemingly waiting for his arrival. Judging from the way the reincarnation tests are conducted, it can't be so unfair that the experts would exhaust their advantages. Lin Feng was just thinking. Suddenly, white light flashed around him, and 10 light pillars formed a halo, connecting into a line and resonating with the crystal peak, reflecting each other's brilliance. Space energy filled the air, forming a smoky platform at the top of the crystal peak, somewhat similar to a martial arts arena. Surrounded by light pillars, it seemed to be a virtual space. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Light pillars fell outside the space, as if a huge cage had been opened. At this time, a message suddenly appeared in the minds of all the experts. There were no words, but went straight into their minds, incomparably clear. Peak battle. The winner is king. Lin Feng's eyes shone brightly. The experts who arrive first have the right to choose, and the winner will be rewarded and advanced to the 5th reincarnation. The rules were simple and clear glance. Apart from that, the one being challenged could choose whether to accept the challenge or not. If not, it would be seen as a forfeit, and the winner would advance, but would not be rewarded. Once the challenge is accepted, it will end with the death of one of the parties. Lin Feng sighed in his heart. The rules were cruel, but there was still some leeway. For someone like him who was being challenged, he could choose not to accept the challenge. Although he would be eliminated, he would not lose his life because of it. Once he accepted the challenge and entered the 4th reincarnation space, there would only be 2 choices, either die or advance. The experts who advance first do indeed have an advantage. Lin Feng's gaze swept across. Hun Kong, the Crystal Queen, and Wu Hao were the top 3, which was enough to show the advantages they had accumulated in the previous 3 reincarnations. With the right to choose, they were basically in an undefeatable position, unless their combat strength was too weak, such as Lei Mozi. Although he was ranked 5th, Lei Mozi's face was pale and extremely ugly. Apart from himself, the rest of the 10 experts were all top-tier gods. If Lei Mozi wanted to win, he would have to challenge himself. Trash. A pair of green and red eyes stared at him. It was Lei Mozi, and his killing intent was raging. Lin Feng smiled indifferently. Being ranked 5th, it was almost impossible for him to fight with him. After all, he and Lei Mozi were the 2 weakest on the surface. Among the first 4 experts, one of them would definitely choose him or Lei Mozi. Of course, choosing the weak opponent might cause the other party to forfeit. Although they could advance, they would not be rewarded. It all depended on the choice. Whoosh! At this moment, the cylindrical space where Hun Kong was extremely bright and beautiful. He was the first to choose. Chapter 22:15. All the experts started to get nervous. Even the shriveling Diamond Empress and the shriveling Diamond Empress were no exception. Although they were peak gods, they had no chance of winning if they were picked by Hun Kong in a one-on-one battle. Peak gods and peak gods were 2 different levels. Lei Mozi wasn't worried, because he was the weakest. He had nothing to lose. If Hun Kong picked him, Lame Mosey would definitely forfeit. Then, even if Hun Kong advanced, he wouldn't get the reward. With Hun Kong's strength, which expert would he lose to? There was no need for him to pick the weakest. Even if he won, it wouldn't be an honorable victory. The shriveling Diamond Empress and Wu Howdy were the most nervous. One was a peak god, while the other was a powerful peak god. They had the right to choose second and third place, respectively. As long as they weren't picked by Hun Kong, they had a 95% chance of advancing. In this reincarnation, strength was important, but so was the right to choose. If a peak god was challenged by a peak god, there was a high chance that he would be eliminated. However, if he had the right to choose, he could choose a peak god or an ordinary peak god. He could even choose a peak god like Lame Mosey. This way, he would be able to win. Whoosh! A beam of light descended. Hun Kong had made his choice. All the experts focused on him. Wu Tongya's short body trembled violently. He gritted his teeth and blood oozed out of his fangs. His arrogant eyes were filled with anger. He clenched his claws and roared. Pa! Pa! Hun Kong and Wu Tongya disappeared from the beam of light and appeared on the battle arena. The surrounding experts were in an uproar. They didn't expect Wu Tongya to accept Hun Kong's challenge. What a smart choice. Lin Feng looked at the battle arena. Hun Kong's tall body completely overshadowed Wu Tongya. In terms of physical strength, they weren't on the same level. In terms of mental strength, Hun Kong had the absolute upper hand. To Hun Kong, he didn't choose his opponent based on strength. No matter who he chose, he would win and advance to the fourth reincarnation easily. This included the peak god, the shriveling Diamond Empress, and the shriveling Diamond Empress. Therefore, he chose his opponent based on personality. He wanted to choose an opponent who had the guts to accept his challenge. Although Wu Tongya's strength was ordinary, he had an unruly personality. He cultivated the Tao of Dark Demon and the Tao of Assassination, which made him even crazier and more reckless. Even if it was a bastard, he would still dare to fight him. However, the outcome was within his expectations. In just one move, Wu Tongya was defeated. Hun Gu's hands condensed the universe, causing space to collapse. From the very beginning, he had already torn Wu Tongya to pieces, not showing any mercy. The faces of the surrounding experts were extremely ugly. Their hearts trembled, and their eyes were filled with fear. If it were them, the result would be exactly the same. The strength of a pinnacle deity was far above that of the other overlords. He stood alone at the top of the pyramid. Crackle, a beam of light, like a shooting star, fell from the sky, falling straight down. Hun Yu stood tall as the meteor light poured in from the top of his head. The perfect energy covered his entire body, fusing with each of his cells. Every inch of his skin was excited. Even someone as strong as Hun Liang revealed a faint smile, clearly enjoying it. Is this the reward? Lin Feng was the same as the other powerhouses, all watching curiously. However, the distance between them was several dimensions. He could not sense the energy aura of the meteor light at all. He did not know what it was made of, and he could not see through its mysteries with the naked eye. It shouldn't be just the origin of space, Lin Feng thought to himself. With Hun Kong's strength, if it was just the origin of space, it wouldn't be of much help to him. Because he was a special life form, both his soul and body had reached an extremely high level of strength. Very strange. Lin Feng was even more curious. At that moment, Hun Yu, who had completely absorbed the meteor's energy, faded into the void and disappeared. Following that, a second beam of light flashed. It was the Diamond Empress. Her skin was white and dazzling, and her entire body seemed to be made of transparent diamonds. Not a speck of dust could be seen on her beautiful face. Every diamond was a natural spatial artifact. The Diamond Empress, a special life form that grew from the Diamond Heart, was extremely skilled in the Tao of space. She was the embodiment of the law of space. In terms of attainments in the Tao of space, she was not inferior to Han Yu. In fact, she was even superior. The Tao of space was the most abundant on the wandering planets, and it was the same at this moment. Therefore, Among all the experts in the reincarnation of destiny, the Diamond Empress had the greatest geographical advantage. In addition, she was a top-notch peak god. It could be said that she was second only to Hanyu. Her strength was slightly higher than Tiku, who was also a top-notch peak god. The experts looked solemn, and their hearts raced. Although they were not as scared as when Hanyu was choosing, they were still very nervous. After all, no matter who was chosen by the Diamond Empress, the chances of winning were very slim, including Lin Feng himself. Of the powerhouses present, after Han Xiong left, the only ones Lin Feng wasn't confident of defeating were the luminous Diamond Empress and Tiku. Will she choose a powerful top-notch god and earn the reward like Hanyu? Or will she choose me or Lei Mosey and pass easily? Lin Feng was very curious about the Diamond Empress choice. She chose one of two. It all depended on what she wanted. Whoosh! After a while, a ray of light lit up. Lin Feng looked at Lei Mosey and saw that the nervousness on his face had disappeared. He let out a long sigh and revealed a faint smile. Because the person chosen by the Diamond Empress happened to be the fourth person with the right to choose, the powerful top-notch god, Lu Gong. Damn it, Lu Gong had a bad temper. Being chosen by the Diamond Empress, he was naturally angry. He was confident that Wu Haodi would not choose him. As long as the Diamond Empress did not choose him, he would have a right to choose and pass easily. But now, he had to face the Diamond Empress, who was stronger than him. Whoosh! Whoosh! The Diamond Empress and Lu Gong disappeared from the pillar of light and entered another space. The two experts were about the same level of strength. Moreover, Lu Gong was good at close combat, and his body was stronger than the Diamond Empress. It was entirely possible for him to counterattack and kill her. So, the Diamond Empress chose him. Lin Feng could understand the Diamond Empress' intention. If she chose other experts, she might not accept the challenge. After all, this was a fight to the death. The Diamond Empress did not intend to muddle through this stage. She wanted to seize every second. She was ranked second in the first 3 rounds, and her strength was close to that of a top-notch god. Obviously, she wanted to give it a try. Under that peerlessly perfect appearance, there was a great ambition hidden within. Unyielding, determined, and persistent, just like the Diamond Empress. Chapter 22:16. The Diamond Empress and Lu Gong started an intense battle. The rest of the experts heaved a sigh of relief. Neither of them was easy to deal with. Needless to say, the Diamond Empress was probably no match for her. Lu Gong's strength was one of the strongest among the top gods. Along with Hun Chi's advancement, 3 of the strongest experts had left. The happiest one was Wu Haodi. He had the third choice, and victory was within his grasp. It was up to him to decide whether he wanted to advance or retreat. He could be more aggressive and choose an opponent slightly weaker than him, just like the Diamond Empress. He could also choose the weakest Lei Mosey or Lin Feng and force them to give up easily. Whoosh! A provocative gaze was cast over. Lin Feng let out a soft "oh." Lin Feng shifted his gaze from one side of the arena. The provocative gaze came from Wu Haodi. Lin Feng couldn't help but smile. He guessed that Wu Haodi would definitely choose him. Firstly, he was the weakest among the experts. Secondly, he had a personal grudge against him. The reason why he was provoking him now was simply because he wanted him to accept the challenge and not give up. Seeing Wu Haodi looking at Lin Feng, Lei Mosey was both relieved and anxious. The Thunder God was challenged, and the fourth choice was empty. After Wu Haodi, it was his turn to choose his opponent. Lei Mosey clearly knew that among the experts present, the only one he was confident in defeating was the weak Lin Feng. If Wu Haodi chose him, he would have no chance at all. So what if he had the right to choose? Instead, the right to choose became a scythe that was placed on his neck. Because the experts who had the right to choose were not allowed to give up. Whoosh! Lei Mosey broke out in cold sweat. After careful analysis, he was extremely frustrated. Instead of fighting for the right to choose, he would rather be challenged directly. At least he could give up and save his life. With his strength, even if he was lucky enough to enter the 4th reincarnation, so what? Sweat dripped down. Gritting his teeth, Lei Mosey glared at Wu Haodi and roared. Wu Howdy was also stunned. He didn't know how he had provoked Lame Mosey. Lin Feng couldn't help but smile at such a scene. A dog biting another dog, a mouthful of fur. If you're smart, you'll choose Lame Mosey. Not only will you be safe, you'll also be able to advance smoothly. Lin Feng's gaze once again focused on the battle stage. If Wu Howdy was really so insistent on choosing him, then the unlucky one would be him. Perhaps in his heart, he was just a speck of dust with meager strength, and he was just lucky enough to escape that day. However, he didn't know that he was no longer the same as before. A powerful top-level god, he also possessed the same battle prowess. Moreover, he was skilled in the Tao of the Soul. On this level, he was completely at his disadvantage. Not only Wu Howdy and Lame Mosey, but Tiku, Tian Dai Wang, and Yin Fajie were also thinking about what would be the most beneficial choice for them. There was almost no optimal choice in the fourth path of reincarnation. It all depended on which choice was the most beneficial to oneself. On the other hand, Lin Feng was the only one who didn't have the right to choose, so he didn't need to waste his energy. He quietly watched the duel between the Diamond Empress and the Deer Duke. They're both close combat experts, but one is nimble and the other is melee. Lin Feng carefully appreciated the match between the two opponents. This was a classic contest of strength and skill. The Diamond Empress was skilled in skills, especially the Tao of Space. She had an open space and controlled the entire situation with her spatial laws, firmly grasping the situation in her hands. Therefore, even though it seemed like the Deer Duke had the upper hand, he was actually still at a disadvantage. However, the outcome was still unknown. To break the Diamond Empress' control, it's useless to attack with pure attrition. I need a burst of power. I need a burst of power to disrupt her rhythm and break her control. Only then will I have a chance to win. Lin Feng put himself in the shoes of the battle and clearly discovered that the Diamond Empress' control was quite strong. Even he didn't have much of a burst of power that could break her control. I can only rely on soul attacks. The third level of the Kuan Ling Heart Arrow and the Human Soul Divination, but it might not be enough. Lin Feng frowned. Due to the Diamond Empress' special nature, she grew from the Diamond Heart. Therefore, her soul defense was extremely strong and wouldn't be disturbed. If he comprehended the Heavenly Soul Divination, he might have a chance to injure her soul and break her control. However, the Human Soul Divination alone wasn't enough. If I want to win, I can only fight her in close combat. Lin Feng thought to himself. His close combat ability wasn't much better than the Deer Duke's. Fortunately, the Diamond Empress chose the Deer Duke and not him. Otherwise, it would be troublesome. However, a battle wasn't just a competition of strength. The winner would only be determined after the battle. Under the pressure of death, there were many people who could perform beyond their limits and counterattack. Bang! The golden fur on his body suddenly expanded by an inch. The Deer Duke was bathed in blood. In this critical situation, the Diamond Empress forced him to unleash his strongest potential. His body trembled and expanded a lot. A pair of giant palms slammed toward the Diamond Empress. For the first time, the latter's expression became serious. Advancement, Lin Feng murmured. Tiku, Wu Howdy, and the other experts also sighed. They didn't expect the Deer Duke, who was severely injured by the Diamond Empress, to advance at the last moment and reach the limit of a top-tier god. His strength suddenly increased, and his giant palms slapped the Diamond Empress away, injuring her directly. It wasn't that his strength surpassed the Diamond Empress, but because of his burst of power. He was caught off guard. Lin Feng smiled, but he wasn't worried. With the Diamond Empress' strength, as long as she stabilized and regrouped, she could wear down the Deer Duke's spirit bit by bit. With the huge advantage she had before, victory was basically assured. As expected, after a series of fierce attacks, the Deer Duke's aura gradually weakened. In addition to his heavy injuries, he couldn't continue. In the end, he was defeated by the Diamond Empress. Whoosh! The unique energy descended once again and landed on the Diamond Empress' body. Almost instantly, her injuries were healed. The meteor light was filled with a perfect charm, causing the Diamond Empress to be wild with joy. Her reaction was much more surprising than Bastard's. From this, it could be seen how helpful this unique energy was to her. Bathing in her body, the Diamond Empress body was overflowing with a holy light. Her aura, which had been gradually weakening, gradually strengthened until it reached its peak. In an instant, whoosh, ultimate energy shone from the Diamond Empress body. The diamond heart appeared in the void, perfect and holy. It caused the entire world to tremble slightly and jump with joy. Wu Howdy, Tiku, and the other experts were all dumbfounded. She broke through. Lin Feng was also stunned. Then, he couldn't help but laugh. A fierce battle and a unique energy source had actually allowed the Diamond Empress, who was at the limit of a top-tier god, to break through the bottleneck and enter a new level. From now on, she would be on par with Bastard. The wandering planet had given birth to a second top-tier god, the Diamond Empress. Chapter 22:17. As the two battles ended, the atmosphere on the Crystal Peak became much quieter. Only 6 out of the 10 experts that passed the 3 paths of reincarnation were left. Wu Howdy, Lei Mozi, Tiku, Tian Daiwang, Yin Fa Jia, and Lin Feng. Some were worried, some were frowning, and some were smiling faintly. Everyone had different expressions and thoughts in their hearts. The ones who were most happy were Wu Howdy and Tiku. The former had the third choice, and the latter was the strongest here. Of the 3 remaining spots, 2 were already in their hands. Tiku looked at Tian Dai Huang with a faint smile. Tian Dai Huang gently smiled back. Oh, Lin Feng saw this and instantly understood. It was obvious that the relationship between Tian Dai Huang and Tiku was not shallow. The 2 special life forms seemed to have feelings for each other. However, it was not a big deal. The reincarnation cycle was a personal battle. Even if they had a good relationship and had a small advantage, they would not go far. The 5th path, the 6th path. Over the countless eras, many experts from Origin Awakened Continent have been defeated by these 2 paths. Most of them were top-level god spirits, and some were even peak god spirits. Hua, a bright light, landed on Wu Howdy's body. He was wearing a white robe and had a confident smile on his face. He was like a general who had supreme power. The third choice. Beside him, Lei Mozi roared in anger. He kept provoking Wu Howdy, but the latter did not even look at him. His eyes were sharp as he looked at Lin Feng. Wu Howdy was a vengeful person. The hatred between him and Lin Feng was so deep that no one here could compare. When Lin Feng escaped, Wu Howdy was already very unhappy. How could he miss such a good opportunity? If you have the guts, then accept the challenge. Wu Howdy narrowed his eyes and spoke to Lin Feng. He did not need to hear anything to know what he was saying. He raised his eyebrows provocatively. To Wu Howdy, Lin Feng accepting the challenge was naturally the best situation. Not only could he take revenge, but he could also earn rewards. However, he also knew that the probability of this happening was not high. At most, it was 10 to 20%. After all, the difference in strength between him and Lin Feng was obvious. If Lin Feng were to accept the challenge, it would be foolish of him to do so, just like Wu Tongya. However, even if Lin Feng didn't accept it, Wu Howdy wouldn't lose anything. He would directly advance to the 5th round of the Heavenly Fate reincarnation and avoid any risks. In any case, he had already exited seclusion. Returning to Origin Enlightened Continent to kill Lin Feng again was not considered a big deal. Swish! The white light pillar that Lin Feng was in lit up, and the surroundings were in an uproar. Yin Fa Jia was not surprised, but he looked deeply at Wu Howdy with a faint smile. Among all the powerhouses, the one who understood Lin Feng's strength the best was none other than Yin Fa Jia. In the world of light, Lin Feng's performance was amazing, and he was the only one who knew the reason why Lin Feng entered the 4th round of the Heavenly Fate reincarnation. It wasn't because he was weak, but because he was bitterly cultivating in the world of time. In the end, he defeated the Guardian of Time. Wu Howdy challenging Lin Feng seemed like a wise choice. He chose a soft persimmon, but in reality, he picked a hard nail. Yin Fa Jia couldn't see through Lin Feng's strength at all. Let me see how much your strength has improved in these 500 years. Yin Fag wanted to know how strong Lin Feng was to be able to defeat the Guardian of Time. Damn it, damn it. Lei Mosey's face was distorted, and his sharp nails were deeply embedded in his flesh, faintly turning red. His entire body was surrounded by lightning, and although he looked majestic, it was as if he was trapped in a swamp, constantly struggling to no avail. Lin Feng was chosen, and he had no chance of survival. In the next battle, the right to choose fell on him, but he didn't have the right to forfeit. No matter if it was TQ, Tion Butterfly Phoenix, or Yin Fag, they were all stronger than him. Once they entered the challenge, they would fight to the death, and there was only one way to survive. His end was here. Cowardly bastard. TQ sneered, and his contempt was obvious. He scoffed at Wu Haoti's choice of the weakest Lin Feng. The experts of the God-fallen world had their own pride, and they wouldn't do such a thing. Tion Butterfly Phoenix was the same, looking at Wu Haoti as if she was looking at a clown, unbearable to look at. Even if he won such a battle, it would be shameful. Lin Feng laughed. Following Wu Haoti's choice, the cylinder he was in lit up, and a clear command appeared in his mind, allowing him to choose. Advance or retreat, it was all in a thought. The answer was very clear. They should all think that I'll forfeit. Lin Feng laughed and made his decision. A strong spatial energy descended, enveloping him, and with a change of mind, he moved through space. Whoosh! Extremely rich spatial energy blended into the surroundings, and the black vortex was very excited. Beams of light surrounded the entire area, making it look like a huge cube. Under his feet was a building similar to a battle stage, containing strong spatial energy. A light flashed in front of him, and his aura was strong. It was the king of the Destiny race, the powerful top god spirit, Wu Haoti. He wore a white crown on his head, and his inhumanly handsome face had an indescribable evilness. His 3 eyes were pure white, especially his third eye, which was as transparent as a crystal, unfathomable and sparkling. This time you can't escape. Wu Haoti's tone was sarcastic, and he raised his head like a tiger looking at its prey, smiling faintly. That's right. Lin Feng smiled back. Obviously, he was still holding a grudge over his escape last time. With Wu Haoti's strength, if he hadn't underestimated him, even with the protection of the prison demon hall, it would have been difficult for him to escape. Clang! A black light flashed in his hand, and the black dragon rose with a roar, its aura strong. Lin Feng held the battle blade black centipede and his fighting spirit sword. The power of his pinnacle true treasure was fully unleashed, and the black vortex spun rapidly, absorbing the surrounding spatial energy for his own use. In terms of the use of spatial energy, he might not be as good as the centipede or the Diamond Empress, but he wasn't much worse than Wu Haoti. Now, the black vortex combined space and time, and there was no distinction between them. Humph! Wu Haoti snorted coldly, not taking Lin Feng seriously at all. With his soul strength, he could feel Lin Feng's life level. Lin Feng had just entered the God Spirit level, so what if his combat power had increased? Last time, he was only at a disadvantage because of Lin Feng's strong soul defense. He wouldn't make the same mistake again. Even if he didn't use soul attacks, he had plenty of attacking methods. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. Many cross-shaped cracks appeared, and they were extremely bright as they attacked directly. Wu Haoti was different from the other Destiny race great beings. Not only was he good at the Tao of Soul, but he was also good at controlling objects and illusion attacks. Moreover, his attainments in space were astonishing. Die! Wu Haoti's eyes were bloodshot, and he exploded with all his strength. Chapter 22:18. Lin Feng was all too familiar with Wu Haoti. The defeat that day was deeply etched in his heart. Wu Haoti had indeed been looking forward to today's battle for a long time, but so had Lin Feng. The hatred between him and the Destiny tribe had long been irreconcilable. If he did not get rid of an elite like Wu Haoti, he would definitely become a big problem. With Lin Feng's current combat power, if he were to fight against elites like the Diamond Empress or Tiku, his chances of winning might not be high, but against Wu Haoti, it was just right. He was more than 90% confident. Prison Fiend Cage. In the face of Wu Haoti's attack, Lin Feng directly released his pinnacle true treasure, Prison Fiend Palace. The huge Prison Fiend Palace suddenly spread out and condensed dark matter. It was like giant obstacles that blocked the space. This move was not aggressive at all, and it was completely harmful to others without any benefit to oneself. But against an elite who was good at the Tao of space, it could not be better. The entire space was like a road that was originally unobstructed, but now it was full of obstacles, making it difficult to use the space law. With Wu Haoti's attainment in the Tao of space, the power of his move would not be reduced too much. But the attack speed, attack frequency, attack visibility, and so on were greatly reduced. A set of powerful sword techniques, but the speed was strangely slow, so the effect was greatly reduced. Insignificant skill. Wu Hao snorted disdainfully and didn't care at all. His hands lit up with a dazzling light, and in an instant, the entire space shook. The endless space energy was extremely excited, as if there was a strong suction force that rapidly rushed downwards. Whoosh! Whoosh! The light of the engravings appeared under the ground, and it was extremely attractive. A huge black hole seemed to appear in the space, and bits of starlight shone, encompassing everything. Wu Haoti's lips curved coldly, and he was full of confidence. He would not give Lin Feng any chance. A pinnacle true treasure. Tiku's eyes lit up. He, who was proficient in the Tao of space, was naturally eager for such a treasure. And it's a domain type. A mid-level pinnacle true treasure can definitely exert the same power as a high-level one here. Tiku looked at Wu Haoti enviously. He glanced at Lin Feng from the corner of his eyes with pity. In his opinion, Lin Feng was already an arrow at the end of its flight, and Wu Haoti did not underestimate his opponent in the slightest. A lion would go all out when hunting a rabbit, so Lin Feng would definitely lose this battle. So strong. Yin Fag's eyes sparkled as he stared at Wu Haoti. He's even stronger than the last time I fought him. My mastery of the laws of space, my control, and my intelligence have all improved greatly. Yin Fag and Wu Hao were old rivals, so Yin Fag naturally knew his background. The true king of the Destiny race was no ordinary person. However, Lin Feng shouldn't be this weak. Yin Fag calmly looked at Lin Feng and revealed a meaningful smile. Although Wu Haoti went all out, he still underestimated Lin Feng. I'm afraid he will suffer. Lei Mosey's eyes stared viciously at Wu Haoti. He wanted to skin him alive and tear his bones apart so that he would die without a burial place. At this moment, he was not in the mood to watch the battle. Various possibilities kept appearing in his mind as he thought of ways to save his life. However, no matter how he thought, there were only a few possibilities and none of them stood a chance. What should I do? What should I do? Lei Mosey broke out in cold sweat as he looked at Wu Haoti with a gloomy and angry gaze. If it were not for Wu Haoti, he would not be in such a difficult situation. At this moment, as Wu Haoti took out the pinnacle true treasure, Lin Feng's slight recovery of the situation was instantly destroyed. If it was outside, it might not be so obvious, but the space energy here was too dense. The endless space energy activated the domain formation and directly swallowed all the dark elements in the domain. Whether it was the power or the level of the laws, it was far superior, so it was easy to destroy. Prey. No matter how much you struggle, you are still prey. Wu Haoti waved his hand and controlled the universe calmly. Firmly controlling the space domain, he was already in an invincible position. Who could break the domain of a pinnacle true treasure? Lin Feng indeed could not break it. However, the fourth stage of the Black Whirlpool was operating at full power and formed its own body. The energy was pure and strong, and it was not affected by the pinnacle true treasure at all. In fact, it even weakened and absorbed the domain true treasure's energy during the collision. Whoosh! Lin Feng approached directly. While Wu Haoti was using the pinnacle true treasure, he had already approached. Now, Lin Feng's space attainment was outstanding. Although he could not use the power of the laws, His comprehension was not bad at all, especially when he had the perception of the Heaven-Ho cultivation, the sixth sense, and the 5 changes stack shadows. The situation suddenly changed. What? Not only did Wu Howdy's expression change, but Tiku and the black butterfly phoenix were also shocked. They did not expect the space domain, which was comparable to a pinnacle senior true treasure, to be unable to restrain Lin Feng. His strength was merely at the level of a deity. How is this possible? The eye of destiny on Wu Howdy's forehead lit up. Although he was surprised by Lin Feng's space attainment, this was a battle of life and death, and he did not have time to think too much. 2 arcs were removed from his shoulders, making a shrill sound. Sizzle, sizzle, controlling attack. 2 arcs of light, one on the left and one on the right, flew toward Lin Feng, as if trying to cut him into pieces. Wu Howdy used all his power, and his figure changed continuously, retreating as he fought, increasing the distance between them. He was very experienced in battle. However, the space here was not infinitely big. Double the speed of light. Lin Feng used a secret technique and forcefully passed through the gap between the 2 arcs of light. The instantaneous explosion brought by double the speed of light was just enough to avoid the attack of the arcs of light. After passing by, the arcs of light turned into an X shape, making a beautiful arc in the air, and then flew back to attack Lin Feng. However, the time difference between the 2 attacks had increased the distance between them. Clang! Hei Tong began to show his power. After waiting for a long time, Lin Feng finally found a chance to get close. From the beginning, he knew clearly how to kill Wu Howdy. There was no other way except to get close. Wu Howdy's foundation was very deep, and he was good at space laws. He was also not afraid of soul attacks, so it would be very troublesome to fight at a distance. Fortunately, the space here wasn't very big. At least, for great beings who moved at the speed of light, the space here was very small, and it could only be considered a slightly bigger battle arena. Damn it, Wu Howdy's eyes were bloodshot, and his eye of destiny was extremely wide open. The dazzling light seemed to bring people to a fantasy land, leaving this world. He tried to use illusion attacks to delay time and increase the distance between him and Lin Feng. However, humans sold death. Lin Feng directly used the middle-level peak True Treasure 3 Soul Heavenly Bell. After the Black Whirlpool's enhancement, it could also unleash the power of a high-level peak True Treasure here. An eye for an eye, an eye for an eye. Illusion at the same time. Chapter 2219. Swish, swish. Lin Feng and Wu Hao were hit at the same time. Using illusions against illusions was an extremely rare sight. Xian Diahuang's eyes lit up as she covered her mouth in shock. She was also proficient in the Tao of the Soul, so she was able to see everything clearly and was completely entranced. Tiku and Yin Fa Jie widened their eyes and were completely attracted by the exciting battle. Suddenly, there was a flash of black light. Whoosh! A tearing force cut through the air like the most perfect beam of light in the world. Wu Hao widened his eyes in shock, and his body was split in half. His energy disappeared instantly as darkness swallowed him. He had never thought that he would die in the hands of Lin Feng, let alone he lost the illusion that he was best at. Bang! Wu Hao's body exploded. He didn't even have the chance to scream. All his unwillingness turned into a death soul attack and crashed into Lin Feng's mind. It was like the collision of a giant spaceship. Oh no! Yin Fa Jie's face changed. He knew the moves of the Destiny race the best. The Death Soul attack was extremely powerful. Wu Hao was so powerful that even Han Xiong, a peak stage divine spirit, would be severely injured or even killed if he took that attack head-on, let alone Lin Feng. Yin Fa Jie clenched his fists and his eyes were bloodshot. He didn't want Lin Feng to die, but there was nothing he could do about it. However, Lin Feng was still standing there as if nothing had happened. He didn't even move. Yin Fa Jie opened his mouth and was dumbfounded. Apart from Yin Fa Jie, Tiku and Xian Butterfly Phoenix were also shocked. The 2 overlords had never thought that Lin Feng would win in the end. They thought that Wu Hao would win easily. There was a huge difference in strength between the two of them. He lost to an illusion. Xian Butterfly Phoenix's eyes glittered. She knew best what had just happened. An illusion against an illusion. What were they competing for? The first was the delicacy of the illusion, and the second was the willpower of the person who broke the illusion. This was a contest of time. Whoever could break the other party's illusion faster would be in an invincible position. The result was obvious. Lin Feng woke up from the illusion even faster than Wu Howdy. So with a single slash, Wu Howdy, who was still in the illusion, died on the spot. Wu Howdy had lost unjustly, but at the same time, he had not lost unjustly. What a pity. If it was outside, the result might have been different. Tiku felt sorry for Wu Howdy. He knew that Wu Howdy had used his illusion technique because he was forced to let Lin Feng get close to him. For an expert who was good at long-range battles, the worst thing was to have a narrow space and be unable to use his skills. Although Wu Howdy had a pinnacle spatial true treasure, he was unable to restrict Lin Feng. Moreover, due to the limited space, he was unable to quickly escape and pull apart the distance between them. That was why he was forced to fight head-on. This defeat was not because of the battle. This kid is really lucky. Tiku looked at Lin Feng. Although he praised him, he did not take it to heart. He was different from Wu Howdy. Including the Butterfly Phoenix, they were all good at close combat. If it were them, they would have easily killed Lin Feng. They would not have given Lin Feng any chance at all. Wu Howdy lost. Lei Mosey's eyes were wide open. A pair of fleshy wings covered in lightning flapped. He was shocked and surprised. He could not believe it. He raised his mouth and eyebrows. He did not expect this result. Wu Howdy, who was sure of his victory, picked a soft persimmon. In the end, he was crushed by a soft persimmon? What the hell is he doing? Did he lose? Or was he tricked by that kid? Lei Mosey was surprised and happy, but he was secretly regretting it. Just now, he was not calm. He had been thinking about how to avoid the battle and give up. He was only focused on Wu Howdy and was blinded by anger. He did not even look at the battle. In fact, he did not even know how Wu Howdy lost. He only knew that Lin Feng cut him in half. That blade technique is not that strong. Lei Mosey looked at Lin Feng. He was puzzled. Suddenly, he grinned. Who cares? Wu Howdy lost. I can choose that kid. Wait. Lei Mosey was stunned, and his expression changed. That's not right. Although that kid was chosen, the winner will advance directly. It does not matter whether the winner or the chosen one. Lei Mosey felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured on him. Lin Feng won. But what was the difference? There were still 3 top-level immortals left. In front of him was still an unsolvable chess game. No. Lei Mosey's face was pale. He shook his head and wailed in his heart. After going around and around, he was back to square one. At this moment, whoosh, a beam of light fell from the sky and landed on Lin Feng's head. As soon as he put away Wu Howdy's treasure, Lin Feng's heart trembled. The black vortex spun crazily and was filled with excitement. He had never felt such a feeling before. Boom! Lin Feng's eyes lit up. His heart trembled. Incomparably pure energy entered his body and was absorbed by his cells, bones, and flesh. Every inch of his skin was trembling, but it was trembling with excitement and joy that came from the bottom of his heart. What kind of energy is this? Chaotic energy? Or is it the most original energy of the universe? Lin Feng did not know. However, he could feel that this energy contained the origin of space, origin of time, origin of strength, origin of light, origin of darkness, and so on. It was a perfect whole. Although it was only a small beam, it was very similar to the energy of the black vortex. It was abundant and powerful. Higher level. The energy level is even higher. Lin Feng closed his eyes and enjoyed the extreme energy. He could clearly feel the saturation of his body and the changes in his cells. When Hun Kong and the Queen absorbed the energy, their bodies were strengthened, let alone him. Their bodies were already saturated, but he was still far from it. The extremely pure energy was extremely rare. The absorption of the body was just a small benefit. The biggest change was the increase in the level of life and the change in the cell structure. As for him, The black vortex had also evolved and transformed. It was perfect, if only there was an infinite amount of this energy. Lin Feng wanted to continue absorbing and enjoying it, but the energy source had weakened and was gradually disappearing. The absorption was coming to an end. Even someone as strong as the queen became a peak god after absorbing it. One could imagine how effective it was. For Lin Feng, this moment felt like a lifetime. The improvement was huge. However, the reward would not be endless. A consciousness suddenly appeared in his mind. It was like a door had opened and was calling him in. Lin Feng sighed. He knew that the absorption of the universe's original energy had ended. It was time for him to leave and enter the fifth reincarnation. Chapter 22:20. He couldn't bear to. Such a reward was too great. For Lin Feng, not only could it rapidly increase his combat power, but it would also be very helpful in the future. Through this chaotic cosmic energy, he seemed to be able to see the most fundamental mysteries of the universe. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He wanted to absorb it a second time, a third time. What if I reject the summon? Lin Feng suddenly had a thought. Would he be unable to advance to the fifth round because of this? No. If I can reject the summon, it means that I have the right to choose whether to enter or not, just like choosing whether to accept the challenge or not. If I'm not wrong, there's at least one more chance to absorb the chaotic energy. What a great attraction! Every time he absorbed it, he would evolve to the extreme. Even a special life form as strong as the Diamond Queen had become a pinnacle god because of it. The benefits he gained from absorbing the chaotic cosmic energy were no less than the Diamond Queen's, or even more, because his starting point was low. The lower the starting point, the greater the improvement. On the Crystal Peak, Lei Mozi, Tiku, Xiao Butterfly Phoenix, and Yin Fa Jie looked at each other, each having their own thoughts. Since Lin Feng was chosen, Yin Fa Jie, who was ranked 9th, became the last one. He lost the right to choose, but he was the most relaxed. Tiku and Xiao Butterfly Phoenix were also calm. They were the strongest among the remaining four. So what was there to be afraid of? The one with the worst expression was Lei Mozi. Although he didn't know how Lin Feng killed Wu Howdy, the fact was that Lin Feng, who killed Wu Howdy, would also advance. He still couldn't choose. Soon, the road ahead would be a dead end. Staring at Yin Fa Jie, Lei Mozi gritted his teeth. He knew that he had no other choice. Although Yin Fa Jie was also a top-tier god, he had just ascended not long ago. In terms of strength and experience, he was slightly weaker than Tiku and Wu Butterfly Phoenix. He still had a glimmer of hope if he chose Yin Fa Jie. However, it was only a glimmer. After all, the gap between a high-level god and a pinnacle god was very obvious. At this moment, whoosh, in another space, Lin Feng's figure flashed, and he returned to the pillar of light he was in as if nothing had happened. All the experts were stunned, and they were completely unaware of what had happened. What happened? He didn't advance. Tiku and Xiao Dai Huang looked at each other, not knowing what had happened. Could it be that even if the one being challenged wins, he still won't be able to advance? Yin Fa Jie frowned slightly. As the 9th choice, he had no advantage in this aspect. If that was the case, he would be in trouble. The happiest person was none other than Lei Mozi. Overjoyed, Lei Mozi flapped his wings, which were covered in lightning bolts, and let out an unpleasant laugh from inside the light pillar. At the end of the road, who knew that there would be a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel? The weakest guy had returned. However, he had just stepped into the deity level. How capable could he be? Whoosh! The pillar of light that Lei Mozi was standing on emitted a resplendent light. His pair of arrogant eyes stared straight at Lin Feng as his lips curled into a sinister smile. He, Lei Mozi, had not reached a dead end yet. He could still continue. Once he killed this human, he would be able to ascend to the 5th reincarnation. As expected, Lin Feng's heart was moved. Just like when he was challenged before, he could choose to accept the challenge or forfeit. Rejecting the summons wouldn't affect him in any other way. Instead, it would give him another chance to choose. Looking at all the experts, other than Tiku himself, he was confident that he could win. Whoosh! Lin Feng and Lei Mosey entered a space. This scene was very familiar to Lin Feng. Being enveloped by boundless spatial energy, he could vaguely feel the absorption of the universe's origin energy. It was still vivid in his mind. I didn't expect to have a second chance. Lin Feng smiled in his heart. It was reasonable for Lei Mosey to choose him. Killing Wu Howdy in the previous round was more of a trick. He didn't reveal much of his strength. Among the remaining four, he was the weakest. Who else would Lei Mosey choose if not him? Just by looking at his smug expression, he knew what he was thinking. It was as if he had picked a soft persimmon to pinch. Thinking back, didn't Wu Howdy have the same expression before? The only difference was that Lei Mosey's strength was much weaker than Wu Howdy's. Where does his confidence come from? Tiku sneered. Even if this human's life level isn't high, killing that kid from the Destiny race was a bit opportunistic. However, his strength isn't weak either. He should be about the same as the remaining human. Lei Mosey, you think you can win? Oomph. Tiku's eyes were sharp. He knew the difference in strength between the two sides. In his opinion, the human was far weaker than him. However, it would be easy for him to deal with Lei Mosey. Next, it's me and Butterfly Phoenix's turn. Tiku nodded. I'll pick the last human. After the battle, all the experts will advance. Butterfly Phoenix can advance without any battle. Although there's no reward, it's still a good thing. Perfect. Tiku calculated in his heart. His gaze fell on Butterfly Phoenix. The latter's bright eyes also looked over. They smiled at each other. In terms of strength, they weren't as strong as Hong Kong and the Crystal Queen. However, they had their own beliefs. If they wanted to win, they had to give it a try. The relationship between the two would undoubtedly be a great help. Perhaps it would be useful in the fifth challenge? No one knew. This Lin Feng has really screwed me over. Yin Fa Jia smiled bitterly. Originally, Lei Mosey would have picked him as his opponent. However, Lin Feng came back in the end, causing Lei Mosey to abandon him. He would have to face Tiku and Butterfly Phoenix. His chances of winning were basically zero. Everything is destined. It seems that my reincarnation cycle has come to an end. Yin Fa Jia sighed softly. His gaze fell on Lin Feng and Lei Mosey. In terms of pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger, I'm indeed not as good as him. Lei Mosey is being toyed with, yet he's still so happy. Shaking his head, Yin Fa Jia could almost see Lei Mosey's miserable ending. Boom! The battle instantly started. Other than Lei Mosey, who was full of confidence, Tiku, Butterfly Phoenix, and Yin Fa Jia didn't even look at him. They didn't even pity him. There was no suspense in this battle. Just from the beginning, Lei Mosey was already at an absolute disadvantage. In terms of close combat ability, Lin Feng could kill Wu Howdy. Naturally, he wouldn't be any weaker than Lei Mosey. Moreover, he hadn't even used his ultimate move or unleashed Shura's killing intent. Even Lin Feng himself didn't know how strong he was when he unleashed his full strength. However, a mere Lei Mosey couldn't force Lin Feng to use his true strength. In just a few rounds, Lin Feng had heavily injured Lei Mosey. Black Tongue descended and killed Lei Mosey as if he was slaughtering a sheep. Lei Mosey's eyes were filled with fear and disbelief. He didn't know what was going on until he died. Chapter 22-21. After killing Lei Mosey, Lin Feng floated in the air and waited. He wasn't completely confident. Maybe the reward was only once, but it was too tempting. It was worth the risk. Suddenly, it's here. Lin Feng could not help but smile when he sensed the familiar energy. The meteor light went straight to the top of his head and spread throughout his body. The black vortex spun quickly again. It was crazy and excited, as if it had eaten the most delicious food in the world. His cells, bones, skin, every layer was quickly evolving and strengthening, evolving towards perfection. It didn't just provide energy. It also had an effect similar to an evolution agent. It improved every layer of his body, removing the impurities and taking the essence, making him perfect. Especially his body, which pointed to the great Tao and clearly understood the essence of the universe. Absorbing the origin energy would allow him to have a clearer understanding of the path he would take in the future, and he would also be more confident. But the most important thing now was to improve his combat power and life level. The origin of the universe's chaos also had good effects in these two aspects. Good Lord, is this his goal? Yin Fag's eyes lit up. At this moment, he finally understood why Lin Feng had returned even though he had clearly won the battle. It was actually for this reward. This light beam is unusual, Yin Fag exclaimed. First, it was the chaotic hoe. Even a pinnacle god enjoyed absorbing it. Then, it was the Diamond Empress. After absorbing it, she broke through the bottleneck and became a pinnacle god. Finally, it was Lin Feng. He had the chance to reach the 5th reincarnation realm, but he stayed at the 4th reincarnation realm and faced unknown challenges. Everything was for the sake of this mysterious reward. The meteor light beam. If Yin Fag could see it, so could Tiku and the black butterfly phoenix. They were even more anxious about the reward, especially Tiku. This two-headed monster's human side was filled with ambition, while his beast side was filled with violence. It was obvious what he was thinking. On the other hand, the black butterfly phoenix was more indifferent. After all, she didn't have a choice. Unless he has the guts to come back. The black butterfly phoenix looked at the human who was enjoying absorbing the strange energy. She couldn't help but think that if that human had the guts to come back, she might also have the chance to taste the reward. But was it possible? Unless he really doesn't want to live anymore. The butterfly phoenix smiled. No matter how he looked at it, that human wasn't stupid. He should know the difference between him and Tiku. If he dared to return, the choice of the next round would be in Tiku's hands. He wouldn't even know how he died. Did he think that Tiku wouldn't dare choose him? Apart from Hong Kong and the Empress of Tiny Crystals, there was no other opponent that could make Tiku fear them. The absorption time was not long, but to Lin Feng, every second was incomparably enjoyable. It was as if he was bathing in the ocean of the universe's quintessence, soaring freely, and devoting himself wholeheartedly to change it. In a short period of time, all his abilities had improved greatly, especially the black vortex. It's almost full. Lin Feng sighed. Both times, the black vortex was the one that absorbed the most ferociously. It was so excited that it wanted to swallow all the energy into its stomach. Perhaps this was the reason why, like attracts like. Now, the 4th stage of the black vortex was on the verge of saturation. He only needed to absorb one more time to advance to the next level. Only Tiku, Butterfly Phoenix, and Yin Fag are left. Tiku will choose between me and Yin Fag. But no matter which one he chooses, the Butterfly Phoenix will definitely choose the remaining one. In other words, if I return this time, I'll have at least one more chance to fight. Lin Feng thought. From his observation, Tiku and the Butterfly Phoenix had a good relationship. They would definitely not choose each other. The chess game was clear. It was just a matter of whether he dared to accept the challenge. If I return, I'll most likely face Tiku. The only ones Lin Feng wasn't confident of winning against were Hong Kong, the Empress of Tiny Crystals, and Tiku. Clenching his fists, Lin Feng felt his new body and the black vortex that was almost full. A hint of fighting spirit appeared in his eyes. Why wouldn't he dare? Before the 4th reincarnation, if I fought against Tiku, my chances of winning were at most 20% to 30%. But now, after absorbing the universe's quintessence twice, I've improved a lot in all aspects. If I fight against him now, my chances of winning are at least 50%. A 50% chance of winning was enough. Not every battle between powerhouses was a battle where they were 100% sure of winning. Moreover, in terms of battle experience and means, Lin Feng was confident that he wasn't inferior to Tiku. He was still quite confident in this battle. If I win, I'll be able to get the reward for the 3rd time. Lin Feng was looking forward to it. If he could fulfill the next reward, his black vortex will be able to advance to the 5th stage. Hua, light flashed. Under everyone's focus, Lin Feng returned to the light pillar again, causing an uproar. Yin Fag's eyes widened in shock. After a long while, he shook his head. Lin Feng is crazy. He's playing with fire. The next one is Tiku. This isn't a joke. Is he too conceited, or is he really that smart? Looking at Lin Feng, Yin Fagia found it hard to see through him. He seemed to be a completely different person from when he was in the light world. Tiku and Tian Butterfly Phoenix frowned and looked at each other. They didn't expect this at all. Lin Feng's return had completely disrupted their plans. Xian Butterfly Phoenix, in particular, pursed her lips tightly. She wasn't stupid. Neither was Tiku. They naturally knew that Lin Feng dared to return because he was confident. He was obviously stronger than the other human. He might even have hidden trump cards. However, the situation didn't allow them to choose. The seventh person to choose was Tiku. The eighth person to choose was Tian Butterfly Phoenix. If Tiku chose Yin Fagia, he would definitely win. However, Tian Butterfly Phoenix would have no choice but to choose Lin Feng. She couldn't give up because she was the one who chose. At that time, Tian Butterfly Phoenix might be defeated and killed. Tiku naturally wouldn't allow this to happen. Tian Butterfly Phoenix and Yin Fagia would have a 50% chance of winning. It would depend on their performance. Of course, Tiku had a more direct choice. He could choose Tian Butterfly Phoenix, and she would give up. However, neither of them would get the reward. Only one could advance. If they couldn't get the reward and lost their soldiers, so what if they entered the fifth reincarnation? They wouldn't be able to beat Tian Ku and the Crystal Queen. They would definitely be eliminated. Rather than that, they might as well fight. At least for now, their strength and chances were very high. Let me see what kind of strength you're hiding. Tiku finally made up his mind. He stared at Lin Feng fiercely in his beast form. He gritted his teeth and clenched his claws. He didn't believe that he, a top-tier god spirit, would lose to a kid who had just entered the god spirit realm. Chapter 22:22. Shua. Lin Feng's figure flashed, and he entered another space for the third time. It was a familiar stage, familiar energy, but an unfamiliar opponent. At the same time, it was the strongest opponent he had faced so far, the limit of a top-tier god, Diku. His strength was second only to Hun Kong and the Crystal Empress. Lin Feng wasn't confident in defeating Diku, but that wasn't a reason to escape. If he wanted to compete with Hun Kong and the Crystal Empress, who had entered the fifth reincarnation, he had to go through Diku's corpse first. Tiku was a very good touchstone to test how strong he was now. How far was he from Hun Kong? 50%. Lin Feng was neither conceited nor unduly humble. He looked at the two-faced monster that was slowly appearing in front of him. At this moment, the humanoid side of the monster was facing him. A pair of scarlet eyes stared at him covetously, revealing a thick, killing intent. Due to the rules, this was a battle of life and death. There was only one winner. BZZ. Two beams of light shot out from the red eyes. Without any warning, they shot through Lin Feng's shadow. Diku snorted coldly, as if he wasn't satisfied with the result. There was no sneak attack here. The moment one entered was the moment the battle started. The strong preyed on the weak, and only the strong survived. Rip, Tiku pulled with both hands, and the space was instantly stretched apart. At the same time, it was squeezed inwards. Lin Feng frowned slightly, and in an instant, the scarlet beam of light shot out again at an extremely fast speed. Chi! Lin Feng raised his saber to block it. A loud noise came from the black dragon blade. The strong impact force pushed Lin Feng back, and a huge suction force came from the space behind him. Tiku sneered, and the power of space law was fully unleashed. The human side Diku was best at the law of space, and it was like a tiger that had grown wings here. However, Lin Feng's attainment in the law of space wasn't inferior at all. He hadn't comprehended the Tao, but he understood it. The fourth stage was close to saturation, and the suction power of the black whirlpool was so strong that it gave Lin Feng a safe place to protect him from the law of space. Shua! Whoosh! Lin Feng's body twisted, and the weeping wither's attack disappeared. What? An ominous glint flashed in Diku's eyes. He didn't think that his move would be so easily broken. He stepped forward with his left foot and chopped out with his hand, emitting a ghostly wail. It was as if a scarlet-eyed wolf was charging at him from behind. He has quite a lot of long-range attacks. Tiku's strength was a little stronger than he had expected. It was a complete set of long-range attacks. Some targeted the physical body, some targeted the soul, and some targeted the entire body. Although Lin Feng also had long-range attacks, they weren't very powerful, so he didn't want to waste his energy. Just like when he killed Wu Hao, close combat was what he relied on. Ha! The prison devil hall appeared in the air. It was as if a huge palace was falling apart. Endless dark matter fell into every corner of the space, filling it up. Lin Feng was already very familiar with harming others without benefiting himself, using the mass and volume of dark matter to block space and weaken the power of space laws. Not only did it become difficult for him to use space, it was also difficult for his opponent to use it. At the same time, a black helmet appeared. A clear pattern appeared on it, like a strange letter shining with a golden light. The black crystal patterns on the king armor lit up, containing a sense of supremacy. Lin Feng's killing intent from Shura rose, his aura quickly increasing. Facing an opponent like Deku, he had to go all out from the start, fighting with his blade. So, as Lin Feng dove forward, several afterimages of his body appeared one after another. Even at such a close distance, it was difficult to see them clearly. One could only sense them with their heart's eye. However, Lin Feng would not reveal such an opening. As he moved, he began to attack. Although the distance was far, it didn't stop him from attacking. A unique rhythm turned into dust. Many of them passed through the dark matter and headed straight for Deku. The latter kept dodging, looking slightly haggard. Especially the blade energies that came from the dark matter, they were hard to defend against. Turning into dust belonged to the Tao of dark matter. Attacking at this time was both fast and fierce, and also suited the requirements. Under the amplification of Shura's killing intent, Lin Feng's strength gradually increased. His killing intent became thicker and thicker, his killing intent became more decisive, and his blade techniques became stronger. As expected, after my physique became stronger, Shura's killing intent became easier to use. Lin Feng was very carefree. After being baptized by the universe's chaotic energy twice, he had greatly improved in all aspects. His physical body was also gradually reaching the level of a deity. The current Lin Feng, in terms of physical body, was not inferior to a special life form like Deku. The stronger his physical body, the more Shura's killing intent he would have to endure. The distance between them quickly closed. However, Deku was not easy to deal with. When the distance was far, it was difficult to break through the afterimages. From the moment of attack to the moment of attack, there was a long time. But when the distance was close, the attacks were more accurate, and the judgment was more direct. Especially when Lin Feng was constantly closing in, his target was very obvious. After dodging continuously, Lin Feng finally hit a wall. Deku hit Lin Feng, and the beam of light from the scarlet eyes penetrated his body like a laser, causing him to be quite injured. Impressive. Lin Feng quickly avoided Deku's next attack and slightly increased the distance between them. Deku's talent was very scary. He was much harder to deal with than Wu Howdy. His soul and spatial attainments in his human form were quite high, and his ability to sense directions was especially accurate. It was very difficult to hide in front of him. Combined with his innate attacks, it was not easy to get close to him. Sizzle. Sizzle. Lin Feng was pushed back again. But this time, he was prepared and retreated in time, so he was only slightly injured. Kuan Ling Heart Arrow. Lin Feng decided to end the battle as quickly as possible and charged forward again. His soul attack went straight for the withered man. After being baptized by the universe's chaos energy twice, Lin Feng had improved in all aspects, including his soul. Although the improvement was not much, the third level of the Kuan Ling Heart Arrow, combined with the human soul of the three-soul Heavenly Bell, was enough to cause great damage to top-tier gods. Deku let out a painful cry like a baby. No one would feel good if their soul was injured by an attack, and this only made Yin Fagia and the Black Butterfly Phoenix outside tremble. Even someone as strong as Deku let out such a miserable cry. What would they do if they were in his place? He indeed hit a trump card. Very powerful. Black Butterfly Phoenix gritted her teeth and nodded. But Deku will definitely win, definitely. This kid hit a card when he fought with me. Yin Fa Jia had a smile on his face, and he was in a good mood. After all, his final opponent was Black Butterfly Phoenix and not Deku. He has to win and fight for the honor of the strong people of Origin Awakened Continent. Chapter 22-23. The enlightened spirit heart arrow can't kill him. Lin Feng was very clear. He had already used up 30% of his soul force, but he had only managed to injure Deku, and this was only one of his souls. Deku had 2 souls and was a special life form with a mutated soul. It was extremely difficult to kill him with just the soul. Moreover, his enlightened spirit heart arrow was not strong enough. If I have the 4th or 5th layer of cultivation, or if I comprehend the heavenly soul Tao, I might be able to kill him directly. Lin Feng circled around as he attempted to approach Deku. Deku was extremely cautious. Although his soul was injured, it only aroused his ferocity. His scarlet eyes were so red that blood was about to drip out. However, he continued to fight steadily, not in a hurry to win. He was like an experienced hunter, waiting for his prey to make a mistake and fall into his trap. Crying Wither clearly had very strong, close combat abilities. Very smart. He's using his human form to constantly exhaust my willpower and strength, waiting for the final close combat to deal me a fatal blow. Lin Feng was very clear about Deku's thoughts, but knowing was one thing. Executing it was another. He had to attack and close in. Deku's long-range attacks were also very powerful, no weaker than his close combat abilities. I have to hurry. Lin Feng shivered inwardly. There was a limit to his body's endurance, and there was a limit to Shura's killing intent. Go! As Lin Feng attacked with Hei Tung, all the dark matter in the surroundings gathered like a tower of sand, reforming the prison fiend hall. In the next moment, the ground was covered in a layer of pitch-black ground, as if he had entered hell. The ultimate ability of the prison fiend hall, the domain, prison fiend domain. The pitch-black ground and the power of devouring and darkness annihilated everything. He was still not familiar with this move. After all, he had only just refined the way of darkness, reaching 100,000 Origin Realm experts. However, the domain itself did not require too complicated comprehension. He only needed to use it along with a treasure, and it would be quite effective. Rumble. Lin Feng gave up on the defensive properties of the Prison Fiend Hall and replaced it with an even more powerful attack. He focused on attacking. The appearance of the Domain of Darkness was a huge blow to Deku. His movements were obstructed, and his face paled. His senses had been thwarted. Although the use of space principles was no longer restricted, the problem was that Lin Feng was now very close to him. If he used space principles again, it would be very dangerous. If he was not careful, he would fall into the tiger's mouth. Clang! Lin Feng's attack was like a thunderclap. It was close at hand. Deku roared. The scarlet eyes on one side of his human form shot out beams of light, while the bestial side on his back went berserk. His claws bent slightly, emitting a cold light. As Lin Feng approached, they slammed into the ground. Rumble! The earth trembled as the withering beast awakened. Its fur stood on end, making it look like a savage. Strange green fur covered its entire body. The withering beast's aura was completely different from before. It was even more savage and unbridled. Chi! The sharp claws tore through space. They contained the heaviness and dominance of the earth, but they also contained the charm of the Tao of strength itself. Unreasonable! Zhanyang! This was the power of the weeping beast. 10,000 annihilation. Lin Feng became stronger when facing a strong opponent. Shura's killing intent rose rapidly. He had held back previously, but now he went all out. His tyrannical body was not inferior to the withering beast's strength. It was like two pieces of steel colliding head-on. Clang! Clang! The sound of metal clashing against metal could be heard. Impossible! The butterfly phoenix's beautiful eyes widened. She covered her mouth. How can a human's body be so strong? This, Yin Fa Jia, was dumbfounded. His heart was in turmoil, unable to calm down. All this time, he had thought that a human's advantage was in comprehension, spiritual sense, soul, and other aspects. A human's disadvantage was their physique. Including himself, he had consumed countless rare treasures and thought of various methods to improve his physical body. However, the results were minimal. But now, Lin Feng could use his physical body to fight against a withering beast. That was a top-level peak god. Moreover, it was a special life form with a powerful physical body and was blessed by the heavens. As for Lin Feng, he had just stepped into the god level. If he was also a top-level god, how terrifying would his physical body be? Impossible. Yin Fag's mind was a little confused. He muttered to himself, "It's impossible for him to be so strong. We are humans. In fact, it was precisely because they were weak that they were infinitely moldable and had infinite possibilities. Lin Feng climbed up from the weakest point. The foundation he laid for each level was perfect. He took it one step at a time. Coupled with his powerful bloodline, his physical body was naturally not inferior to his special life forms. However, it was indeed not as exaggerated as it was now. His life level had just stepped into the god level, and he was already comparable to a top-level peak god. The main reason was the universe's chaotic energy. The two waves of chaotic energy baptized and transformed Lin Feng's body. What a strong body. Awesome. Only by engaging in close combat could he truly feel how strong his body was now. Lin Feng swung his saber rapidly and attacked continuously. His body had made great progress in terms of strength, reaction speed, flexibility, and so on. Including his defense and recovery speed, it had improved a lot. The injuries he had just suffered had already mostly healed. Kill Deku and withstand the third wave of chaotic energy. Lin Feng's conviction was stronger, and his fighting heart was more tenacious. His eyes were shining brightly. On the other hand, Deku became more and more frightened as he fought. Lin Feng's strength was completely beyond his expectations. Damn it, he has been hiding his strength. And it's not just a little bit. I've been fooled by him. Deku was furious, and his expression was extremely ugly. What Lin Feng had shown in the previous two battles was completely different from what he was showing now. According to Deku's original estimation, even if Lin Feng had many trump cards, he wouldn't have many. After all, he had just stepped into the god level. Who would have thought that this ordinary-looking human was so monstrous? After being cut by Lin Feng's saber, Deku was bleeding profusely. His face was filled with panic. He quickly turned his body and once again pulled away. Two rays of light shot out from his scarlet eyes, trying to pull away from Lin Feng. Stop dreaming. Lin Feng's eyes turned cold. He leaned to the side and took the two rays of light head-on. At the same time, he directly killed Deku's human form. Blood splattered. In an instant, two sharp claws tore through Lin Feng's defense. Deku's beast form went berserk. Boom! A soul attack. The third layer of the Kuan Ling hard arrow that originated from Lin Feng, the effect of the human soul flight, directly attacked the wither's weakness. Gritting his teeth, Lin Feng roared. The black dragon in his hand revealed its loftiness and swiftly killed the wither's beast form. In a short moment, Deku died on the spot. I won. Lin Feng let out a sigh of relief. His body was covered in blood, and his injuries were not light. This battle was not easy to win. Chapter 22-24. Whoosh, another beam of light shot down like a gift from the heavens. It pierced through the top of Lin Feng's head and spread throughout his body. To Lin Feng, this was a situation that he was extremely familiar with. The injuries he had sustained during the battle with the Ku Di were instantly healed. His body excitedly absorbed the most fundamental energy of the universe as the black vortex spun rapidly. The fourth stage was close to saturation. Lin Feng knew that the absorption of the universe's chaos origin would cause the black vortex to rise and be comparable to the light runes and dark runes. However, in terms of pure energy and power of laws, the black vortex was far stronger than those of the same level. After all, it had already fused the space and time laws. Apart from the black vortex, my body can also absorb to saturation this time. His life level had advanced to the level of a god, causing his body to be like an empty water tank. He could not fill it up even after absorbing it several times. This time, the universe's chaos energy had already descended for the third time. In addition to the changes to his body, the universe's chaos energy was also a kind of benchmark energy. It would naturally turn into water droplets and fill up the water tank. Although this might only be the most inconspicuous function, the huge water tank was about to be filled up. After this absorption, my body will reach the limit, and the black vortex will advance. My combat strength will surpass that of a top-tier god. Lin Feng was very confident. Even if he could not be compared to Hun Kong, he should not be inferior to the Diamond Empress. Tiku's death in battle made Yin Fa Jia and Xiao Butterfly Phoenix happy and sad. From Yin Fa Jia's perspective, he naturally hoped that Lin Feng could win and fight for the Origin Awakened Continent's experts. However, Xiao Butterfly Phoenix and Tiku had a close relationship and were inseparable. Tiku's death was a huge blow to her. Looking at Lin Feng, the two of them had different gazes. What a beautiful victory. Yin Fa Jie recalled the battle just now and praised. If it were me, I would definitely not be Tiku's opponent. I'm afraid that most of my strength would be exhausted in close combat. Lin Feng, this kid, is really powerful. It turns out that he had a trick up his sleeve in the light world. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been a draw. Yin Fa Jie nodded slightly and smiled. He was happy for Lin Feng's advancement and satisfied that he did not have to face Tiku. Although he was not very confident in facing Xiao Butterfly Phoenix, it was much better than Tiku. Clack, clack. The black butterfly phoenix gritted her teeth like a female leopard. She raised her fiery red wings and stared at Lin Feng with hatred. She couldn't wait to devour Lin Feng. She didn't even bother to hide the murderous intent in her eyes. I'll kill you. I'll kill you. She and Tiku were a couple in the God-fallen world. They were both special life forms, so they naturally appreciated each other. Moreover, their innate talents and abilities weren't that different. Even though Tiku's appearance was ugly, he treated her extremely well, already establishing a deep relationship after countless great years. Tiku now, calm. On the other side, Yin Fa Jia looked over and revealed a meaningful smile. First, you have to get past me. Once there's a flaw in his mind, he'll definitely be anxious for success. I have hope for this battle. Lin Feng naturally couldn't see the hatred in the black butterfly phoenix's eyes. At this moment, he was cherishing every moment to improve himself. The energy transformed from the meteor light beam was actively coursing through his body, causing his combat strength to improve significantly in all aspects. This was one of the main reasons why he was able to defeat Tiku. If it weren't for the fact that his physical body was so strong, Lin Feng wouldn't have been able to kill Tiku so easily. I made a breakthrough. Feeling the instantaneous change of the black vortex from the 4th stage to the 5th stage, it almost instantly absorbed the energy of the entire space. Tornado scattered clouds. Too fast. He was completely unable to fill his stomach. Fortunately, there was an endless supply of energy in this space. As soon as it was absorbed, it was as if the space was twisted and saturated again. The black vortex was incomparably jubilant as it once again devoured the boundless energy. The cycle repeated itself. Every devour and change happened in the blink of an eye. Lin Feng's life force level changed along with the advancement of the black vortex. His comprehension of the surrounding space energy also increased a lot. His current spatial talent was completely different from before. It could even be compared to the light and darkness runes. His bloodline was incomparably powerful. The 5th stage black vortex wasn't even comparable to the 5th stage light runes and darkness runes added together. If he could make good use of it, its power would definitely be terrifying. However, Lin Feng didn't. There's still a long way to go. Lin Feng wasn't in a hurry. He hadn't cultivated much in this area and needed a solid foundation. Starting from the beginning couldn't be done in a short amount of time. On the contrary, the light runes and darkness runes had the guidance of his ancestors' myriad heaven path. Their combined power couldn't compare to the fifth stage black vortex, but if he cultivated the 9 heavens of light and darkness, it would be different. Just cultivating the first stage would make him invincible here. If the black vortex becomes stronger, it means I can control it better. My comprehension of the path of light and darkness will also be deeper. It might be easier to combine the two. Lin Feng nodded. Previously, the black vortex only existed in name. Only the divine patterns of light and the demonic patterns of darkness cooperated with each other. However, it was different now. With a stronger black vortex as the foundation, the fusion would be more active, and there would be more possibilities for him to try. It was like practicing martial arts with an expert watching. No matter how you tried, you wouldn't have to worry about suddenly going crazy. It's about time. Once again, Lin Feng sensed the summoning coming. The universe's chaotic energy in his body was getting thinner and thinner. All of it had been absorbed. His body was full and had reached the limit of the God realm. Glancing at the space outside, Lin Feng had already made up his mind. Leave. Only the black butterfly phoenix and Yin Fa were left. They could decide the last spot. If he returned, it would be good for the black butterfly phoenix to choose him. He could enjoy another baptism of the universe energy, but she shouldn't be that stupid. After all, Deku was far stronger than her. Normally, the black butterfly phoenix would choose Yin Fa and he would be left behind. If the last person couldn't advance and was eliminated, it would be troublesome. Instead of taking a chance and leaving his fate in the hands of the black butterfly phoenix, he might as well take the initiative to control his own fate. Moreover, he was already very satisfied with 3 baptisms of the universe energy. One more baptism would just be icing on the cake. There was no need to be greedy. Whoosh! A light flashed, and Lin Feng's figure disappeared. He entered the 5th reincarnation. Chapter 22-25. There was an endless sea of clouds and a steep and endless ladder. Dense spatial energy covered the clouds, and lively spatial elements danced in all directions like fairies. It was a vast expanse of white, without any other colors. This place was like a fairyland, with clouds and mist lingering around. It was magnificent and otherworldly. Hanyu stood in the sea of clouds with his hands behind his back. He held his head high and looked at the sky in the distance. No one knew what he was thinking. The Diamond Empress sat cross-legged between heaven and earth. Her body had condensed into beautiful diamonds. Spatial elements were absorbed into her body from time to time. Her aura was sometimes strong and sometimes weak. She was consolidating her strength. 2 peak deities. They were also the 2 powerhouses who had advanced to the 5th reincarnation. Suddenly, a strange energy appeared. Hanyu retracted his gaze and glanced over. The Diamond Empress opened her crystal eyes and looked at the newcomer. She was surprised but also a little impressed. The newcomer was a human, a strange but familiar human. Oh, Hanyu was slightly surprised, but did not say anything. He continued to look at the sea of clouds in the distance with a calm expression. To him, it was just a little curiosity. No matter who advanced, they would not affect him at all. They would not be a match for him, because he was the strongest person in the God-fallen world. I didn't expect him to not be Deku. The Diamond Empress looked at Lin Feng carefully and thought, judging by the time, there should be at least 2 competitions. It doesn't make sense. Did they perish together in the first competition? Who did he defeat to get in? Lei Mozi. The Diamond Empress pursed her lips and closed her eyes again. Although she was curious, what she needed to do now was to improve her strength. She had just advanced to peak deity and was about to start the 5th reincarnation. The Diamond Empress had to seize the last moment to improve her strength. She had already come this far. She wanted to go further. She wanted to win. She wanted to become the master of a wandering planet and unify the planet. She did not want to lose to Hanyu. The atmosphere seems to be very tense. Lin Feng smiled and glanced at Hanyu and the Diamond Empress. They were so close that he could clearly feel their auras and pressure. The Diamond Empress did not give him much pressure. She was not a battle-hungry person. Although she had a fighting heart, she did not lose her gentleness. Hanyu was different. Although his aura was completely hidden and could not be detected, he was like a sleeping giant dragon. Once he woke up, he would break through the clouds and dominate the world. The pressure he was giving himself was even greater. Although they were both peak deities, Han Yu is obviously stronger than the Diamond Empress. My current battle prowess is roughly on par with the Crystal Empress. If I were to fight Han Xiong, although both of them are peak gods, the chances of me winning aren't too high. Lin Yu. After all, they had just fought last time, so it was basically impossible for them to fight again in this round. His gaze swept around, sizing up this fairyland-like place. As he absorbed the rich spatial energy, he felt a faint sense of unease in his heart. It seemed that this trial of reincarnation was not very friendly to him. However, he was different from when he was in the second reincarnation. The black vortex showed his true bloodline. His spatial talent was not weak at all, especially after absorbing the universe's chaotic energy 3 times. The black vortex was upgraded to the 5th stage. It was on par with the divine pattern of light and the demonic pattern of darkness. In terms of talent alone, my current spatial talent is comparable to Hun Kong and the Empress of Crystal, Lin Feng thought to himself. However, it was only in terms of talent. In terms of attainments in space, he was worlds apart from them. If the 5th reincarnation tested spatial attainment, it would be troublesome. Looking at the sea of clouds and the fairyland, Lin Feng sighed. He sat cross-legged in the air like the Diamond Empress and stabilized his mind. As the saying goes, counter soldiers with arms, water with an earth weir. There was nothing to worry about. He had gone through the first 4 reincarnations. 5th reincarnation. Who cares? I wonder if Senior Yin Fa can get the last slot. Lin Feng waited patiently. He sensed his new body. It was full of energy. The advancement of his strength in the 3rd and 4th reincarnations was like giving him a full charge. He had enough strength to face the rest of the tests. He did not have to wait for long. The final spot was created not long after Lin Feng. It was not the slightly stronger black butterfly phoenix, but Yin Fa Jia, the strongest person on the Origin Awakening list, who had yet to reveal himself. He was the same as Lin Feng. He had cultivated hard in the 3rd reincarnation to increase his strength. The 4th reincarnation had good timing and good luck. Although he did not have the right to choose, he was lucky to pick an opponent like the Black Butterfly Phoenix. Although the Black Butterfly Phoenix was slightly stronger, its battle experience was not as good as Yin Fags. Its closest special life form, the Withering Wither, had just been killed by Lin Feng. Its mind was unstable. The Black Butterfly Phoenix wanted to quickly advance and take revenge on Lin Feng, but Yin Fa took the opportunity to counterattack. In the end, Yin Fa defeated the Black Butterfly Phoenix and took the last slot. He entered the 5th reincarnation. Of the 4 slots, 2 were taken by the experts of the Origin Awakened continent. Hun Kong and the Crystal Empress were both shocked. First it was Lin Feng, then it was Yin Fa. They did not expect that the ones advancing would be 2 normal humans and not the experts of the God-fallen world. On the other hand, Lin Feng was not surprised. He had guessed that Yin Fa had a higher chance of advancing. Senior Yin Fa, you are indeed powerful, Lin Feng said with a smile. Thanks to you. Yin Fa laughed. He was in a good mood. If Lin Feng had not killed the Withering Wither, he would not have been able to face the Black Butterfly Phoenix, let alone advance. Senior strength seems to have increased. Lin Feng could feel an even stronger aura coming from Yin Fa's body. He smiled. This was the effect brought about by the chaotic energy of the universe. However, Yin Fa's breakthrough was not as good as the Crystal Empress. Even if I increase my strength, I am still the weakest of the 4. Yin Fa shrugged and smiled. The Heavenly Tao reincarnation is not just a one-on-one battle. Lin Feng pointed at the cloud sea-sky stairway in front. The next reincarnation will test you. Senior Yin Fa might be very good at it. Oh, Yin Fa Jie raised his eyebrows. Lin Feng smiled. He looked into the distance. The rolling cloud sea was like a giant dragon waking up. Hong Kong and the Crystal Empress looked serious. The surrounding wind and clouds surged. A storm was coming. The elemental fluctuations of the space energy became more intense. Rumble, the cloud sea sky ladder, seemed to protrude from the bottom. It climbed up one section after another until it reached the sky above the endless clouds. It was extremely eye-catching. Streaks of golden light appeared between the cloud's sea-sky ladder, connecting to form a supreme golden dragon. Whoosh! Lin Feng's heart moved. The information in his mind was now clear. The fifth reincarnation, open. Chapter 22-26. Climb the spatial cloud ladder. Lin Feng's eyes lit up. On the cloud ladder, a golden dragon pierced through the sky. It was incomparably domineering. The top was covered by thick clouds, making it impossible to see the end. The instructions in his mind were very clear. It was to step onto the cloud ladder and reach the top. That was where the last reincarnation cycle was. However, it was not as easy as it seemed. To step onto the spatial cloud ladder, one needed to possess sufficient spatial energy, and two, one needed to have high attainments in spatial laws. Neither could be omitted. Just like a saber technique, the exquisiteness of the moves and the profoundness of the concept should coexist. Heaven rank, spatial laws. 100,000 origin points are divided into 4 stages, 3 stages, 2 stages, and 1 stage. The difficulty and power of each stage are different. They correspond to the 4 stages of the spatial cloud ladder. Lin Feng raised his head. Although he could not see the complete appearance of the spatial cloud ladder, the outline of it flashed in his mind. To climb the spatial cloud ladder, the simplest way was to comprehend 100,000 origin points. Among them, 40,000 elementary origin points, 30,000 intermediate origin points, 20,000 advanced origin points, and 10,000 top-level origin points. However, it was too difficult. Comprehending all of them meant that one's attainments in spatial laws had surpassed the level of gods and reached the level of heavenly gods. Comprehending the corresponding spatial laws and increasing one's cultivation base is the same. The higher one's cultivation base after great perfection, the stronger one's attainments will be. Corresponding to the position of the spatial cloud ladder, one can climb higher. If one's spatial laws are strong enough, one can also reach the top after cultivating to 100,000 origin points. Lin Feng pondered. At this moment, Hong Kong and the Crystal Queen had already begun to move. They climbed the spatial cloud ladder as fast as they could. Amidst the lingering clouds, the 2 peak gods soon disappeared without a trace. In almost an instant, they had passed a quarter of the way to the spatial cloud ladder. Their attainments in spatial laws were extraordinary, so they were like fish in water. Moreover, the energy level of peak gods was relatively high, so there were no obstacles. It's fast. However, it's still very difficult to reach the top. This hurdle would become more difficult the further one went. It would be useless no matter how fast one climbed at the beginning. The key was the breakthrough at the end. If one did not have true strength, it was possible to be stuck at the last stage for thousands of years. To him, it was all the same. Although Hong Kong and the Crystal Queen were climbing as if they were walking on flat ground, the first few steps of the ladder would have stopped them. This was because his attainments in the Tao of space were ridiculously poor. His foundation was practically zero. As expected, it's the same as the second trial. The Tao of space is my weakness. Last time, I was lucky enough to pass. This time, I'm here again. Sorry to trouble you. Lin Feng nodded to himself. Encountering a hurdle that required mastery of space was undoubtedly a huge problem for him. Even if he were to start cultivating again, he would not be able to compare to Hong Kong and the Crystal Empress, who had accumulated over countless eras. Was he going to die here? Lin Feng was unwilling to give up. It was not his style to say that he had failed before even trying. His gaze fell on Yin Fa Jie. At this time, the ladder was already climbing up steadily. They looked back and forth and smiled, encouraging each other. Looking at Yin Fa Jie's back that was gradually getting further and further away, Lin Feng smiled bitterly. This was not the second trial, where he could copy, follow, and take shortcuts. Climbing the space cloud ladder required one to take one step at a time. Every step was a symbol of mastery of space. With my current physical body and the spatial talent of the black vortex, it is not a big problem in terms of energy level. Lin Feng could feel that his strength had already reached the requirements. It was as if he could easily pick up that treasure sword. However, he knew nothing about that peerless sword technique. There were two ways now. First, start from the beginning and comprehend the elements of the space law step by step. Analyze 100,000 origins. If you comprehend and analyze enough, you can continue climbing. The 4 stages of the space cloud ladder did not require one to comprehend 100,000 origins. If so, there would not be enough time. At each stage, it only required one to comprehend a small portion of 100,000 origins. However, even if it was only a small portion, it was still 100,000 origins. Lin Feng had analyzed 100,000 origins of the light and darkness Grand Taoist before. He was very clear about the difficulty. In particular, the 100,000 origins of the space law were divided into levels. The higher one went, the more difficult it was to approach the top. Second, improve the laws of space. Every law of space is composed of 100,000 origins. As a result, it represents mastery of space. Improving the laws of space is improving mastery of space. Comparatively speaking, this is simpler, but it only seems simple. Before one's cultivation level was reached, it would be more difficult to improve. The closer one was to the origin realm, the more difficult it would be to improve. This was because it required perfection. It required one to be close to the limit. However, if one had not reached the origin realm, it was easier said than done. The difficulty of analyzing 100,000 origins remained the same from beginning to end. Increasing one's mastery of the laws of space was easier at first, then harder. Neither path was easy to take. Bastard and the Empress of the Crystal have taken the second path. Lin Feng knew very well that they had been moving quickly from the very beginning. Their mastery of the laws of space and their mastery of the laws of space was very high. As a result, it was as easy as walking on flat ground. However, it would be difficult to improve afterwards. The further they went, the more difficult it would be. It was like walking on thin ice. Whether they could pass the space cloud ladder depended on their mastery of space. Senior Yin Fa has taken the first path. His mastery of space is not high. He mainly cultivates the Tao of light. As a result, analyzing 100,000 origins and relying on his comprehension ability to break through will be easier. Although it will be slower at the beginning, it will be smoother at the end. With my situation, I should also take Senior Yin Fa's path, but Lin Feng was still rather hesitant. This was because he knew that it was very likely that he would fail in the end due to a lack of time. He was very skilled at analyzing 100,000 origins, and the black vortex had already reached the 5th stage. Coupled with the geographical advantage, it would be much easier to comprehend 100,000 origins. However, this trial only had a time limit of 1,000 years. Even if he had 2 or 3 times the time, it would not be enough. He estimated that he would be able to reach the final stage of the space cloud ladder in 1,000 years if he was lucky. Under normal circumstances, he would be able to reach the 3rd stage of the space cloud ladder, where he would be dissecting higher-level spatial origins. However, it was not practical for him to improve his mastery of the laws of space. In this aspect, he was far from being able to do so. Looks like the odds are against him. Since that's the case, let's dissect 100,000 origins. At least it will be more beneficial for the future. Moreover, who knows, maybe there will be a miracle if I'm lucky. Relaxing his mind, Lin Feng let out a light breath. After making up his mind, he stepped onto the space cloud ladder. Together with Yin Fa, they began to dissect elementary spatial origins and slowly climbed up. Chapter 22-27. 400 slots. The first stage of the spatial ladder was not difficult. Each one corresponded to a basic spatial source, and one could step on it after analyzing it thoroughly. It's fixed. When Lin Feng stepped on the first step, everything around him instantly became blurry, leaving only the stairs leading up and down. However, his perception of space instantly increased, especially when he sensed one of the spatial source points, which was the clearest, like a bright star in the sky. Analyzing a fixed spatial source was undoubtedly more difficult. But to him, it did not matter. After all, he had not analyzed the other spatial sources, so it did not matter which one he chose. There was still a chance. With the experience of analyzing 100,000 source points, there was always something he could learn from. Plus, analyzing spatial source points went from easy to hard. First, basic spatial source points, then intermediate, advanced, and top-notch spatial source points. Maybe he could learn from them and analyze them more easily. However, only after he started to analyze them did he realize the difficulty of spatial source points. Even a most ordinary elementary space source was much more difficult to analyze than the light and darkness grade Daos. As expected of heavenly laws, Lin Feng spent 10 days to analyze the first spatial source point. One had to know that the environment here was very suitable for analyzing spatial source points, and they complemented each other. But the time he spent was still huge. 10 days was not long. But the problem was that the first stage of the spatial ladder needed to be analyzed as many as 400. And this was just a basic spatial source point. If it was an intermediate spatial source point, the difficulty would be 10 times higher. If it was an advanced spatial source point, the difficulty would be 1,000 times higher. For a top-notch spatial source point, the difficulty would be more than 10,000 times higher. Oh, Yin Fa, who had chosen to work slowly, was also climbing up the ladder step by step. He was different from Lin Feng. Although he did not major in the path of space, he had the experience of the inheritance and had also cultivated many spatial laws. It was just that the path of light was stronger, so Yin Fa majored in the path of light, but it did not mean that his spatial laws were weak. Otherwise, he would not have been able to reach here. Because he had cultivated many spatial laws before, it was easier to analyze them. He did not even need to comprehend many of them to understand them clearly. The experience of the inheritance also contained countless insights into the path of space origin. This was his advantage. However, Yin Fa also knew that this was only an elementary spatial source, and it was still too early. Moreover, him being ahead of Lin Feng didn't mean anything. Hong Kong and the Crystal Empress were already nowhere to be seen. This hurdle wasn't about competing with others, but rather, it was about self-improvement, a competition with oneself. 1,000 years was neither short nor long. In the first year, Yin Fa's progress completely left Lin Feng in the dust and was far ahead. However, in the second year, he discovered that Lin Feng had begun to catch up with him. His speed of improvement was rather fast. In the third year, Yin Fa was shocked to find that Lin Feng was already very close to him. Surpassed me. On the fourth year, Yin Fa looked at Lin Feng, who was one step above him, with mixed feelings. He knew what this meant. Lin Feng was truly starting from scratch. Step by step, he would catch up with him. I didn't expect his spatial talent to be so strong. Yin Fa sighed. Comparisons were odious. Even though he had a higher life level than Lin Feng and came into contact with more spatial laws, he was still completely defeated. Now that Lin Feng had caught up, the distance between them would only increase. This unknown human youth had created miracles again and again in the cycle of destiny. His potential was endless. Even so, it's impossible to pass through the spatial cloud ladder in 1,000 years. Yin Fa was very clear that this was not something a normal human could accomplish, especially Lin Feng, who was comprehending from scratch. The first stage was the easiest. The higher one went, the harder it was. The difficulty increased tenfold. To reach the top in 1,000 years, there might be a glimmer of hope if the first stage was completed within a year. However, it was already the fourth year. Under normal circumstances, Lin Feng would need at least 5 years to reach the second stage. To reach the top, unless there's a miracle, Yin Fa sighed. 5 years and 10 days. Ta. Lin Feng dissected the 400th elementary space origin and stepped onto the second stage of the space cloud ladder. Clouds and mist lingered in the air as the golden dragon revealed its slender body. Its scales shone brilliantly, looking extremely awe-inspiring. However, the dragon's head was still buried in the thick clouds, falling straight to the sky. Huff! Lin Feng exhaled softly and calmed his mind. He knew that he was slightly faster than Senior Yin Fagia, but this did not mean anything. His current progress was still far behind. He looked around and did not see Hong Kong or the Crystal Queen. Both of them were at least above the third stage of the spatial cloud ladder. I wonder how difficult the intermediate spatial origin is. Lin Feng seized the time to start dissecting it. There were indeed some difficulties in dissecting the elementary spatial origin in the beginning. However, as he became more familiar with it, the dissection went smoothly. Although he was not completely satisfied, his dissection speed was close to the limit. Even so, it still took him 5 years. If he could not improve his dissection of the intermediate spatial origin, his chances of reaching the top in 1,000 years would be very slim. One could see the whole picture from a single spot. Just dissecting the first intermediate spatial origin made Lin Feng's heart palpitate. A total of 77 days. Although it took less than 10 times the time to dissect the first elementary spatial origin, the difficulty of dissecting it was obvious. Now, he had already dissected 400 elementary spatial origin points and was very familiar with all aspects of dissecting spatial origin points. It still took so much time. The second stage's 300 steps was definitely not easy to climb. I can't care so much. I'll try it first. It's still early. Lin Feng pursed his lips. He did not know the result until the last moment. It was only the 5th year of 1,000 years. There was still a lot of time. With this thought in mind, Lin Feng quickly stabilized his mind and began the second stage of dissecting. The 300 intermediate spatial origin points were dissected one by one. Although it took much less time than expected, it still took a total of 35 years. Including the 5 years in the first stage, a total of 40 years had passed. These were the easiest 2 stages. The remaining 2 stages were more than 100 times more difficult. The third stage of the spatial cloud ladder. No. After Lin Feng finished dissecting the first advanced spatial origin point, he shook his head. 200 advanced spatial origin points, the first one took him 5 years. Compared to the intermediate spatial origin points, the difficulty of dissecting advanced spatial origin points was a qualitative upgrade. In 1,000 years, no matter how much he tried to save, it was impossible to complete the third stage in 300 years. And the fourth stage was even more terrifying. Chapter 22-28. At the top of the space cloud ladder. There were only 100 steps here, and it was already the top of the space cloud ladder. After crossing these 100 steps, one would reach the top, where the clouds were thickest and where the golden dragon head roared. That was also where the 6th path of reincarnation was. However, it was not easy to reach the top. Since ancient times, many talented experts had fallen at this stage, and there was no lack of peak gods among them. Even though Hong Kong and the Diamond Empress were extremely proficient in spatial energy and had profound attainments in spatial energy, they were still in trouble. They could walk as if they were walking on flat ground because they had profound attainments in spatial energy and a strong foundation. However, their attainments in spatial energy were not enough for them to reach the top. Hong Kong, the strongest expert in the God-fallen world, was undoubtedly ahead of the rest. He was very close to the top now, and there were only 25 steps left out of the 100 steps. However, just as Lin Feng had predicted, the further he went, the more difficult it would be. Compared to Hong Kong, the Diamond Empress was much weaker. She was only at the beginning of the 4th stage, and there was still a long way to go before she reached the end. Looking ahead, the Diamond Empress was unwilling to give up, but she was also more aware of the gap between her and Hong Kong. Even though she had broken through the 4th path of reincarnation, her accumulation over countless eras would not lie. Hong Kong was indeed worthy of being the strongest expert in the God-fallen world. His foundation was as deep as ice. and she could not catch up to him now. There's still time. I still have hope. I'm the embodiment of the path of space. There must be a way. Since she had already come this far, the Diamond Empress was naturally unwilling to give up. Her heart was made of diamonds, and she was extremely tough. Even now, she was still full of fighting spirit. The Diamond Empress had not only relied on her talent to become a peak god, but also her own strength. The real deal. The time limit of 1,000 years was neither long nor short. Soon, 100 years had passed. A new face also appeared on the third step, Enbark. His spatial talent was indeed extraordinary, and his comprehension was also astonishing. He was one of the best, even in the God-fallen world, but compared to Lin Feng now, there was still a gap. The 22nd step, Enbark looked up and was quite shocked. Unknowingly, the distance between him and Lin Feng had increased by a large margin. Every grid on the third step represented the analysis of a high-level space origin, which was something he had never seen before. Enbark knew very well that among the space laws he had cultivated and comprehended before, there wasn't a single high-level space origin. Most of them were composed of elementary and intermediate space origins. Even so, he was still slower than Lin Feng in analyzing the first two steps. Right now, the gap between them would only widen. As expected of origin-awakened continent's most outstanding genius, this level of comprehension is truly breathtaking. Enbark was full of praise. There was envy in his eyes, but there was no jealousy. He was not a jealous person and had a broad mind. Even if he couldn't do it, he hoped that Lin Feng could do it and raise the morale of the origin-awakened continent's experts. However, Enbark also knew that even if Lin Feng had such a monstrous aptitude, his foundation was too poor. He was still far from success, and his chances were slim. It wasn't that Lin Feng was bad, but that the samsara of destiny was too difficult. Looking at the current progress, Lin Feng can certainly advance to the fourth stage, but Enbark sighed and smiled bitterly. He was even more miserable. He estimated that he wouldn't even be able to see the fourth step, and the 1,000-year time limit would be up. Just treat it as absorbing experience. My trip to the Heavenly Fate reincarnation this time was worth it. Enbark's mentality was very good. Failure was within his expectations. Being able to reach this step had already far exceeded his previous expectations. At least this time, he had benefited a lot. He had no regrets. Stepping onto the 23rd step, Lin Feng's eyes shone brightly. 55 years of continuous comprehension and analysis. From the first grid, he spent 5 years, and the following years were getting shorter and shorter. Now, he could even use less than 2 years to analyze a high-level space origin. His progress was quite great. If he continued to improve like this, there was still hope. But Lin Feng knew his own situation. The reason why there was room for improvement was that he had never analyzed a high-level space origin before. His subsequent improvement was more of becoming more and more proficient, and not an improvement in his nature. From the first grid to the 10th grid, and from the 10th to the 20th grid, there was a big difference. And from the 20th grid to the 23rd grid, the improvement was very small. He had almost reached the limit of what he could improve. The third stage has 200 grids. At most, it will take 300 years. Adding the 45 years spent in the previous two stages, the 1,000-year time limit will only be about 600 years. Although the fourth stage only is 100 grids, the difficulty is more than 10 times more difficult than the previous 900 grids combined. The hope is very slim. Lin Feng knew in his heart, but there was nothing he could do. When he stepped into the third stage, he had thought about it, but other than moving forward step by step, there was no other way. Therefore, in the end, he could only fight steadily. Now that the last trace of hope was almost destroyed, there were only two paths left in front of him. Either he continued to move forward. Although he couldn't reach the end, at least his space attainment could continue to improve, and his strength would improve step by step. Or he could take another shortcut and open a new path. There were still 900 years left in the 1,000-year time limit, and there was still a chance. If he continued on the old path, he would spend hundreds of years, and it would really be too late to turn back. But what other methods were there? Should he cultivate the space laws again and improve his cultivation? Or should he copy the space engravings and comprehend the space laws like he did in the second reincarnation cycle? Lin Feng was hesitant. He had thought about these two paths before, but the hope was more difficult and smaller than dissecting 100,000 sources. Judging from the current progress and situation, his previous choice was not wrong. Because his foundation was poor, starting from scratch, dissecting was the most direct and most suitable path for him. However, 1,000 years was too short, and there was no time at all. Phew, Lin Feng sighed softly and recovered from his cultivation state. The surrounding scenery entered his eyes again, and it was a vast expanse of white, as if he was in a dream. The clouds and space energy complemented each other, and they filled the endless stairs, gorgeous and strange. Behind him, Yin Fa Jie took steady steps and climbed up step by step. Above him, Hun Kong and the Crystal Empress were nowhere to be seen. They were obviously on the higher fourth step and were now sprinting toward the sixth reincarnation cycle. The golden dragon's head was still buried in the sea of clouds, and his face couldn't be seen. However, the golden dragon's scales were shining. It was mighty and noble, full of domineering aura. The dragon soared into the sky. From afar, it looked very lifelike. Lin Feng's heart suddenly moved. This golden dragon. Chapter 22-29. When he first saw this golden dragon, Lin Feng thought it was real. Later, he discovered that this was not the case. It was just that it was too real, and with the clouds and mist surrounding it, it seemed so lifelike. From the first step to the third step, and even the fourth step at the top, there was this golden dragon. It seemed there was some meaning behind it. As the saying goes, everything exists for a reason. Not only did this golden dragon exist, but it also ran through the entire spatial cloud ladder. It was clearly somewhat unusual. Let's take a closer look. Lin Feng's heart stirred, and he immediately moved in the direction of the golden dragon. The closer he got, the clearer it became. Every scale and every inch of the golden dragon's flesh seemed to be right in front of him, so close that he could touch it. This was an illusory but real golden dragon, faintly standing on the spatial cloud ladder. What a strange dragon. Lin Feng stretched out his hand to touch it. His right hand seemed to touch water, ripples appearing. It directly passed through, and the golden dragon returned to its normal state. It seemed illusory, but it was also incomparably real. Below it, he could feel a powerful life energy, as well as a rich spatial element composition. Is this also a spatial law? Lin Feng was very curious. His intuition told him that the shortcut he had been looking for might be related to this golden dragon. Lin Feng stared at the golden dragon, focusing on every pattern and scale on its body. Lin Feng guarded his mind. The more he looked at it, the more profound and difficult it was to understand. It was like the embodiment of space, full of complex charm. It was not alive, but was composed of spatial energy. It was condensed from a specific law, and it actually had a trace of life. It was very powerful. What is so profound about it? Is it to comprehend this golden dragon, or something else? Lin Feng could not make up his mind. But rather than wasting time to analyze the 100,000 origin points and end up with nothing in the end, he would rather take a risk and see if there was any other opportunity to advance to the sixth path of reincarnation. He believed that the heavens must have opened a window for him. This golden dragon was that window. He calmed down and comprehended. Lin Feng had a feeling that this golden dragon should be the same as the Diamond Empress. It was a manifestation of the laws of space and contained the ultimate mysteries. Comprehending this golden dragon might be able to improve his attainments in the laws of space and help him climb the space cloud ladder. Year after year. The direction is correct, but Lin Feng frowned. His current position just happened to be slightly above the center of the giant golden dragon. Comprehending from a position close to it and comprehending from a distance had a very different effect. Over the past 10 years, he had indeed gained some insights and confirmed that this golden dragon was indeed formed from the laws of space. However, what he saw was not everything. The part above the third stage was already very blurry. The dragon head above the fourth stage, the crucial finishing touch, was covered by clouds and mist. It was completely impossible to see it clearly. Right now, it was like a peerless secret manual. He could only see more than half of it, but he couldn't see the crucial part. It was possible to cultivate this secret manual step by step, but the effect would be greatly reduced, especially since his foundation in space was too weak. There were many things he only knew a little about. Without a teacher to consult, he could only rely on himself to figure things out. His speed would undoubtedly be much slower. Was there any other way? Perhaps I should be more straightforward. Would it be possible to discard everything and cultivate in parts? Lin Feng's initial attempt was to comprehend the golden dragon as a whole. However, because the dragon's body was not complete, some parts were blurry and some parts were not clear enough. Therefore, his progress was slow. Right now, breaking through from various parts was also an attempt. However, it was more difficult to comprehend from the surface to the point, because there was more to comprehend. Scales. Lin Feng looked at the composition of the dragon's body. The structure of every inch of the scales was actually very complicated. Countless veins intersected, and the space engraved structure was like a picture scroll. I seem to have seen it somewhere before. Lin Feng was immersed in it and was slightly stunned. He seemed to have had this feeling before. It was very similar. This kind of carving from the point to the surface, from the fine to the dense, was like the second reincarnation of destiny. Yes, copy. Lin Feng suddenly remembered. The current situation was very similar to the second reincarnation of destiny. The difference was that the previous space engravings were on the honeycomb crystals, but now they were on the scales of the golden dragon. Although there are far more scales than honeycomb crystals, if it is broken down, it is actually just honeycomb crystals. I can ignore the connection between each dragon scale and just copy it one by one. As the copying continues, I'll see what changes there will be. Copying engravings is also a kind of analysis of the space origin. Lin Feng was very experienced and naturally understood. There was not only one way to analyze 100,000 origins. Any method could be used as long as it allowed one to have a deep understanding of the space origin. Moreover, climbing the space cloud ladder did not necessarily require one to analyze 100,000 origins. Increasing one's comprehension of the laws was also a path. There was no need to follow the rules and seal one's progress. This method should be feasible. Lin Feng had already tried many methods and did not mind trying one more. After all, there was still a lot of time for 1,000 years. He was still qualified to make mistakes. As soon as he thought of it, Lin Feng began to copy. With the foundation of the second reincarnation, he got the hang of it quite quickly. Soon, he gradually reached a good state. However, no matter how he copied, he seemed to lack something. The space elements were excited, but they could not be connected to the path of space. I understand. Lin Feng suddenly understood. From the beginning, he had copied the front position of the dragon's body. It was too difficult, and there was no way forward or back. Naturally, he could not connect. If he really wanted to take this path, he should do it step by step, starting from the bottom. The dragon tail corresponds to the first step. The dragon head corresponds to the highest step of the ladder. The golden dragon itself penetrates the space cloud ladder. It has already hinted at everything. Lin Feng smiled and then walked down the ladder. It was not a big deal to start from the beginning. Since he wanted to try to copy the golden dragon, he naturally had to copy the scales of the entire dragon. Copying from the bottom was the best way to go from easy to difficult. Why didn't I think of it before? The 400 elementary spatial origin points on the first step are all fixed and not randomly given. They contain guidance from the very beginning. The 400 elementary spatial origin points correspond to the golden dragon scale. Lin Feng nodded. Sure enough, there was always a way out. The fifth reincarnation was the same as the second reincarnation. There was not only one way to pass. Right now, there was more than enough time. Chapter 2230. He started from the first scale. With a clear goal and direction, the path was much easier. Compared to the third stage dragon scale, the first stage dragon scale was not only easy to copy, but it also gave him a lot of insight. I guessed right, this is indeed the law of space. It's just the beginning, and there aren't many mysteries of the law. It's just the tip of the iceberg. After clearly copying the first scale, Lin Feng knew what was going on. The spatial patterns on the scale connected into a line, faintly containing a unique law of space. If he immersed himself in it, he would be able to comprehend it. However, there were still few dragon scales at the moment, and they couldn't form a whole on a large scale. Secondly, he didn't have time to immerse himself in it to comprehend the law. He continued to copy the second scale. Lin Feng wasn't worried about not being able to copy it properly. If he couldn't copy it, it would be like the second reincarnation, disintegrating halfway through the copy, and the spatial patterns couldn't be connected into a line. Now that it was formed, it proved that his copy was successful. It's much easier than the second reincarnation. Lin Feng's finger pointed in the air without any obstruction. Soon, a perfect dragon scale pattern appeared in front of him. It was exactly the same as the dragon scale on the golden dragon in the void, except that it was slightly less lively. Similar in form, similar in spirit. At least for now, it was enough. It was like one had practiced the saber move to perfection and the other had just learned it. That was the only difference. It's because of the black vortex. Lin Feng naturally knew the reason why he could copy it so easily. It was because of the advancement of the black vortex and the improvement of his spatial talent, that everything became natural and simple. If even the first stage of dragon scale copying was slow and troublesome, what would he do after that? Just like the cloud ladder, the complexity of the carvings on the spatial origin points in the dragon scales would increase as time passed. 400 dragon scales. Lin Feng spent a little more time on the first 100 scales, and it took him nearly a month to complete it. After that, he became more proficient. The second 100 scales took him less than half the time before, and the third 100 scales took him less than 10 days. Done. Lin Feng clearly drew the 400th dragon scale and smiled with satisfaction. At this point, it only took him 60 days. Compared to spending 5 years to analyze 100,000 origin points, it was completely different. It seems that something is still missing. Lin Feng compared the dragon scales he drew with the dragon scales in the void and frowned slightly. Individually, they were about the same, but when the 400 pieces were connected together, they were lacking a lot. I understand. Instantly, Lin Feng understood the gist of it. In addition to the individual scales, the edges and corners of each scale were connected by engravings, as if a severed line had been reassembled. Moreover, each scale was adjacent to at least 2 other scales. Even though he had copied it to perfection, there was almost no difference, but the engravings at the corners were a little rough. As the saying goes, a difference of a hair's breadth leads to a difference of 1,000 miles. Swoosh, whoosh, swoosh. Lin Feng's finger moved in the air. It was as if a meteor was dancing in the air, extremely beautiful. His eyes sparkled as he was completely immersed in comprehending the mysteries of the space law. Start from the very beginning and draw the entire 400 scales in one go. That will give you the clearest insights. Lin Feng sneered, his thoughts completely immersed in the space law. It was like practicing a set of sword moves from the beginning. Every subtle change, every step, every rotation of the sword, and even the changes in the muscles were very clear. Every time he reconstructed it, he would gain a little more insight. Again and again. It was not difficult to draw and copy the scales. As long as he succeeded once, the second time would be easy. The time-consuming part was the repeated failures in the copying process. For Lin Feng, it was not difficult to copy the scales again and again. Instead of modifying them one by one, it was better to push them down and start over. After all, the copying of each scale here was different at each time. Slight differences in the state of mind would also affect the result. While Lin Feng returned to the bottom of the first step and began to draw again. Starting from the beginning did not mean failure. Instead, he would gain new insights. As the saying goes, reading a book 100 times will reveal its meaning. Lin Feng had long been clear about the texture structure of the 400 scales. The only thing left was how to connect them into a line and combine them. No, the composition there was a little slow just now. At the 353rd scale, the state of mind was too immersed, causing the connection to fail to form a whole with the other scales. Lin Feng didn't think it was a waste of time to strive for perfection. Now, the golden dragon that he wanted to comprehend went straight through the sky. The difficulty was extraordinary. If the foundation at the bottom was not solid, the comprehension of the space law above would only become more and more difficult. He must be meticulous to every dragon scale and every engraving. Not even the slightest flaw was allowed. Hard work paid off. After hundreds of failures, Lin Feng finally completed the first stage of the redrawing of the dragon scales. It was done in one go without any mistakes or ambiguities. Compared to the golden dragon in the void, the feeling was very different. Although there is still no breath of life, it already has a certain amount of vitality and power. Lin Feng nodded. The reason why there was no breath of life was probably because this was only the tail part of the dragon. The finishing touch had not been added yet. It was not necessarily a difference in copying. Every dragon scale is closely connected to each other and is integrated into one. There is no distinction between them. It is a whole. The copy this time was a success. Although it was still lacking a little, Lin Feng knew that this was already the best he could do at the moment. Some things cannot be seen now. After all, this was only the tail part of the dragon. The body and head of the dragon had not been copied. The space law was a whole. Looking at the dragon tail alone was lacking. Begin the second stage. Lin Feng rested for a while and then began the second round of copying again. He stepped on the Cloud Sea stairs and entered the second stage of the 300 grid. Each grid corresponded to a medium space source point. He had already analyzed them all before. But now, he was copying the dragon scales. It was equivalent to abandoning the previous results and starting from scratch. The drawing of these 300 dragon scales is much more difficult than the following 400 dragon scales. Lin Feng knew at a glance. In any case, he had been copying for nearly 100 days and could be considered to have a small achievement. It was precisely because he was familiar with it. But the method is still the same as the previous 400 dragon scales. First, one by one, then 300 pieces. Although it was a bit of a drag, it was not as good as directly connecting from the first one. But with a solid foundation, even if there were any changes, he could react immediately and make corresponding changes. It was more stable. Shua. Lin Feng was soon immersed in it. Chapter 22:31. The 300 dragon scales of the second stage were more complicated and had more engravings. But for Lin Feng, who was proficient in copying the first stage of the 400 dragon scales, it was not difficult to get started, but it took more time. While copying the engravings, he was immersed in the profound meaning of the space law contained in them. Time flew. In just over 500 days, Lin Feng perfectly engraved the 300 dragon scales, meticulously and accurately. However, it was much more difficult to connect these 300 dragon scales with each other than the previous 400 dragon scales. After all, it was the connection of mid-level space origin, and each dragon scale had its own mysteries. Fortunately, he had already analyzed the 300 mid-level space origin, and the comprehension was twice as easy with half the effort. In 2 years, Lin Feng had made remarkable progress. He perfectly drew the 300 dragon scales of the dragon body in one go without any mistakes. Next, it's connecting the previous 400 dragon scales with these 300 dragon scales. Lin Feng knew that this was a big project. It was not just connecting the two, but also related to some unique secrets. It was like 2 different sets of saber moves, with different artistic conception, different speed, and different power. It was easier said than done to combine them. In fact, it's simply fusion. I can even fuse light and darkness into one. It's just connecting the dragon body and dragon scale engravings. What's so difficult about that? Lin Feng was unperturbed. The truth was just as he'd expected. In less than half a year, he'd successfully connected the 2 parts of the dragon's body into one. Since then, the 700 dragon scales had formed a perfect whole, and more than half of the dragon's body had been completed. Sure enough, the comprehension is very different. Lin Feng sighed. The 700 dragon scales of the dragon body contained a lot of mysteries of the space law, and the energy was also different. This was something that the previous 400 dragon scales and 300 dragon scales did not have, and it would only appear when they were combined. However, compared to the golden dragon in the void, it's still a little less. Lin Feng compared them and easily found the difference. One was really full of life aura, and the golden light was vivid and lifelike. The other was just a simple space engraving, and it was easy to see through a glance. I've only connected the two parts now. I'll see the real situation when all four parts of the dragon body are connected. I just don't know if there's enough time. Lin Feng was a little worried. Although he had already passed through 2 segments of the spatial cloud ladder, they were only the easiest 2 segments. He had yet to reach the most complicated 2 segments. Earlier, he'd returned in failure from the 3rd segment of the spatial cloud staircase. The 3rd segment of the cloud ladder. Where did Lin Feng go? You haven't seen him for 2 years. Have you given up? Yin Fa was still firmly analyzing the high-level space origin. Although his speed was not fast, he walked step by step with great steadiness. In any case, his goal was no longer to pass through the cycle of reincarnation. On the contrary, he was even more tranquil and undistracted, allowing his analysis speed to advance by leaps and bounds. However, the difficulty of obtaining a high-level space origin was still there. Up until now, Yin Fa was still only at the beginning of the 3rd segment of the cloud ladder. He couldn't even catch up with Lin Feng's previous progress. Suddenly, Yin Fa turned around to look when he sensed a wave of fluctuation from the spatial scaling staircase, and he noticed Lin Feng's appearance out of the corner of his eye. He was slightly surprised and curious because Lin Feng's position was completely different from before. His aura seems to have changed a little. His gaze is not on the spatial cloud ladder or the high-level space laws. Strange. Following Lin Feng's gaze, Yin Fa was even more curious. What's so special about this giant golden dragon? Is it related to Lin Feng's disappearance in the past 2 years? Ugh. It seems to be a little unusual. To be able to reach this point, Yin Fa was naturally not an ordinary person. Comprehension, ability, talent, all aspects were dragons among men. Seeing Lin Feng's changes, Yin Fa was immediately inspired and immersed himself in the space laws that the giant golden dragon carried. At this time, Lin Feng had already begun the 3rd stage of copying. 200 dragon scales. Lin Feng had tried it before, so he knew how difficult it was. This time, he tried it again. With his previous experience and familiarity, he was much more confident. Starting from scratch, he carefully copied every single dragon scale. Every single stroke was perfect. 1 scale, 2 scales, 3 scales. Although the difficulty had increased a lot, the copying itself had not changed much. It had just changed from a single line to multiple lines, and the composition was more complicated. Comprehending the mysteries of the space laws was the most important. This stage was a stage that he had to cross. Therefore, Lin Feng had made a painful decision at that time. He would rather give up 100 years and start all over again. Facts proved that his decision back then was correct. Now that he had started all over again, he had gone further at an even faster speed. In just 5 years, he had surpassed where he was back then. In the 20th year, he had constructed more than 100 dragon scales. In the 33rd year, he had completed 200 dragon scales and the high-level space origin structure. In the 49th year, the 200 dragon scales were perfectly connected, condensing into a brand new whole in one go, and the space origin structure increased dramatically. In the 61st year, the 200 and 300 dragon scales were combined. In the 75th year, the 900 dragon scales were completed. With one stroke of the composition, the golden dragon's body was perfectly presented, exuding a terrifying aura. It was unparalleled for a time. This path was the right choice. Lin Feng stepped onto the peak of the 3rd step and looked down at Yin Fa, who was still thinking hard and working hard to climb up. He had started later, but reached first, completely surpassing Yin Fa. The dragon's body has been completed, and the only thing missing is the finishing touch. If the dragon's head can also be completed, the entire golden dragon will be perfectly presented without any flaws. My attainments in the space laws will increase greatly, and my chances of stepping into the sixth path of reincarnation will increase greatly. With bright eyes, Lin Feng stepped onto the next step. It was only a small step, but it was a qualitative improvement, and he had stepped into a new world. Lin Feng arrived at the top of the pyramid, and the first thing he stared at was the roaring dragon's head. It was high up, and a pair of domineering dragon eyes looked down on the entire land. He was the emperor. In this world, he was not the only one. Hong Kong and the Diamond Empress were already one step ahead of him, and they had already landed on the fourth step, which was enough to show their abilities. Among them, the Diamond Empress was at the beginning of the last 100 steps, and the pressure on her was quite great, so it was not easy to improve. As for Hong Kong, this super monstrous genius that even a meteor planet thought highly of, he was a special life form, and now he was displaying his peerless talent. The 88th step. How impressive! Lin Feng sighed. In less than 200 years, Hong Kong was already close to the peak, about to reach the top of the space ladder and step into the sixth path of reincarnation. This was a true dragon among men, and it was incomparable. Chapter 2232. A human. It's him? The fourth step wasn't big. Lin Feng's arrival immediately attracted the attention of Hong Kong and the Crystal Empress. Hong Kong looked at Lin Feng curiously. He wanted to know how this human with such a low life level managed to get here. In the Diamond Empress's eyes, there was a hint of wariness and caution. However, anyone who could reach this point was definitely not a mediocre person. One path of the six paths of reincarnation was better than the other. Even she herself was only lingering on the fourth step. This human strength seemed ordinary, but he must be capable. Shua. Lin Feng ignored the gazes of Hong Kong and the Crystal Empress. The moment he got used to it, he began to draw the dragon head of the golden dragon. The 100 scales here were more closely connected, and there were many overlapping parts. It was difficult to draw them individually, and even more difficult to connect them into a line. 100 scales corresponded to 100 steps, which corresponded to 100 top-notch space source points. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Pointing in the air, Lin Feng forced himself to remain calm. He clearly knew that this was a critical moment, and he had to choose the last step of this path. If he didn't succeed, he would die trying. Sweat dripped from his forehead. The first and last scales were often the most difficult to draw. The former was lacking experience, while the latter was the most stressful, especially when it came to top-notch space source points, which were comparable to space laws. Drawing them was easier said than done. Fortunately, Lin Feng was only copying it. He only needed to grasp its form and spirit, and did not need to understand its meaning. If that was the case, it would be utterly impossible for him to reach this place in a short period of time and catch up to Hong Kong and the Chrysalis Empress. A total of 17 years. I finally succeeded. Lin Feng wiped away the sweat on his forehead and sighed with emotion. The giant dragon scale in front of him was drawn with a single stroke. Every detail was perfect and flawless. The space engravings crisscrossed like the curves of a flower. It was beautiful beyond compare. Rather than calling it a dragon scale, it was better to call a work of art. It was hard to look away. Being able to successfully draw the first dragon scale meant that the difficulty of drawing a single dragon scale was within his grasp. Lin Feng quickly began to draw the second dragon scale. He was even more confident. 15 years. It was faster, more accurate, and more perfect than the first dragon scale. It could be even faster. Lin Feng's eyes shone with vigor as he drew the third and fourth dragon scales one after another. The seemingly complicated dragon head turned into 100 scales, making it much simpler. From 17 years to 12 years, then from 12 years to 10 years, 9 years, and even 8 years, Lin Feng's progress was remarkable. It only took him 3 years and 7 months to get to the 99th dragon scale. As for the 100th dragon scale, that's it. Under the strong pressure, Lin Feng was forced into his strongest state. It took him only 2 years and 11 months to complete a perfect dragon scale drawing. It was done in one go, like a soaring dragon roaring. That was where the dragon's eye was, the finishing touch. Although it lacked a bit of spirit, Lin Feng's heart was filled with satisfaction after perfectly drawing 100 dragon scales. At this moment, it was as if a heavy stone had been lifted from his heart, and he completely relaxed. Finally, it was done. Lin Feng looked up. After more than 400 years of continuous drawing, the situation on the 4th step had changed. The Diamond Empress had climbed to the 63rd step and was gritting her teeth as she charged up. But at the end, more than half of the 1,000-year time limit had passed, and she was still at the 63rd step. Her hope was extremely slim. As for Bastard, the last square, Lin Feng's heart trembled. He had guessed that Bastard's talent was invincible, and that he was the proud son of heaven of the god-fallen world, recognized by the wandering planets. But he did not expect him to be so powerful. Seeing was believing. Bastard was now standing on the last step. He only needed one more step to reach the top and officially enter the 6th path of reincarnation. There was still more than enough time. Amazing indeed. Lin Feng sighed. Looking at the tall figure with a natural domineering aura, he felt admiration. Although he had completed the last 100 dragon scales, he was still far from completion. There were still 2 rather complicated steps to go. First, he had to connect the 100 dragon scales of the dragon head. The connection of these 100 dragon scales was very complicated, like a precise circuit diagram. The slightest carelessness would mess it up. Moreover, it was a top-level space source, and it contained even more profound spatial laws. Second, he had to connect the dragon head and dragon body. The concepts and energy of the two were very different. To fuse them together, it would take a Herculean effort. Even Lin Feng himself wasn't sure if he could complete these 2 steps within the time limit. However, it all depended on effort. I'll take it as far as I can. Lin Feng did not care about Bastard's progress. This hurdle was mainly a competition with him. Whether others could advance or not had nothing to do with him. Instead, Bastard's arrival at the last step stimulated him deeply. He wanted to compete with the Bastard. He also wanted to advance to the 6th path of reincarnation and reach the end. I will never admit defeat. Lin Feng gritted his teeth and made up his mind. His lower finger was even more powerful and firm. He began to copy the 100 dragon scales from scratch. His mind was completely immersed in every composition. At the same time, he comprehended the spatial laws contained within. He was going all out. The 5th stage of the Black Vortex stimulated Lin Feng's strongest spatial talent. In terms of talent, he was not inferior to Bastard and the Crystal Queen. It was just that his foundation was still shallow and unstable. He had never immersed himself in the path of space. However, this did not hinder his progress, especially at the crucial moment. The spatial laws contained in the dragon head were the essence and essence. It was much more precise and perfect than the dragon body. Although it only took up a small 100 scales, each dragon scale contained a top-level space source. A single dragon scale was not cheap. The spatial laws were profound. Both aspects improved at the same time. They complemented each other. The comprehension of the law of space, even if it was only a little, led to the copying of the dragon scale. Every stroke of the drawing of the dragon scale was a whole new comprehension process. It was different every time, and there was a new understanding every time. Slowly, the river of time flowed. Lin Feng's comprehension became deeper and deeper. His footsteps also started from the 1st step of the 4th stage. As he comprehended, he climbed step by step. At first, the Crystal Queen did not pay much attention. However, when Lin Feng reached the step she was on, the Crystal Queen widened her eyes in shock. He caught up. How is this possible? The Diamond Queen was flabbergasted as she stared in disbelief at this inconspicuous human. Now, he had actually set foot on the 64th grid, just like her. One had to know that every step forward was extremely difficult for her, but this human was very easy. It was as if he was really climbing the steps. Step. The 65th step. Lin Feng surpassed the Crystal Queen. The latter opened her mouth slightly, completely stunned. Chapter 2233. He did not stop. Under the flabbergasted gaze of the Diamond Queen, Lin Feng took one step at a time, as if he was climbing up without the slightest hindrance. His calm and composed demeanor made the Diamond Queen wonder if she was dreaming. It was so difficult for her to climb even one step. She had been improving step by step for hundreds of years, and now she was almost at her limit. However, this unremarkable human had easily surpassed her. It was as if there was no bottleneck at all as he continued to climb upwards. At the top of the mountain, Han Yu stood proudly like an emperor. Lin Feng naturally did not know. At this moment, he was completely immersed in the comprehension of the spatial laws. Sometimes he would step forward, sometimes he would stop, and sometimes he would be enlightened. His finger pointed in the air, and dragon scales appeared one after another. From half a dragon head to half a dragon head, and then to half a dragon head. His progress was rapid. In this state, his comprehension improved rapidly. Very soon, he had already left the Crystal Queen far behind, leaving her in the dust. Even though the Crystal Queen was a peak divine being, the increase in her strength here did not provide her with any substantial fundamental help. Her ability to comprehend space was the key. In the end, her talent was still lacking. She could not compare to Han Yu, and she could not compare to Lin Feng. Han Yu, who was at a critical moment in his comprehension, was only one step away from reaching the top. Suddenly, he sensed movement behind him, and a faint pressure came from his heart. When he turned around, he was shocked. Human brat, a human has caught up with me? To Han Yu, this was undoubtedly like a bolt of lightning. He was shocked, and his proud heart felt humiliated. His eyes shone brightly. Ah! He roared, as if declaring his sovereignty. Han Yu waved his hand domineeringly. His entire body instantly burned, and his bloodline was fully activated. Boundless power surged. His body was like a huge black hole, absorbing the spatial elements and gathering them all in an instant. Pa! Pa! Han Yu clenched his fists, and his aura and power suddenly changed. He took a step forward and forcibly broke through the final bottleneck. His figure disappeared before everyone's eyes like a golden dragon. His aura pierced the sky, and he was invincible and unstoppable. Bastard, he passed. The Crystal Queen muttered. She had guessed that such a day would come, but she did not expect it to come so quickly and so suddenly. Hunchback broke through the shackles right under her eyes and successfully reached the top, entering the sixth path of reincarnation. There was no obstruction, no pressure. This was the strength of the strongest person in the God-fallen world. Even though they were both pinnacle gods, the disparity in their strength was apparent. She was still far from being able to match up to Hong Kong. Impressive. Lin Feng also woke up from his drawing state. With such a huge fluctuation, it was hard not to wake up. He stepped on the 90th square and was still 10 steps away from Huan Yu, but he was unable to take another step forward. Lin Feng clearly knew that this was his current limit. The dragon head formed a perfect whole. Even the final finishing touch was perfectly presented in a state of epiphany, without any flaws. However, the second step had yet to begin, and his comprehension of the laws of space was still in a state of confusion. There were still 10 squares left, and they were still as difficult as ascending to the heavens. The further he went, the harder it was to determine the steps, especially the last square. Even someone as strong as Hong Kong had been trapped here for hundreds of years. Today, he broke through under Lin Feng's stimulation. Since Huan Yu can do it, I can do it too. Lin Feng was even more confident. Since Hong Kong could take this step and enter the sixth path of reincarnation, he could definitely do it too. There was still a little less than half of the 1,000-year time limit left. He only lacked one small step, connecting the dragon head and dragon body. Quick, quick, quick. Lin Feng gritted his teeth and made the final push. Compared to himself, the Crystal Queen and Yin Fagia had long lost their chance of success, but he still had a chance. His 1,000 years of hard work depended on whether he could succeed this time. The key to connecting the dragon head and dragon body was fusion. It's very difficult to connect with the laws of space. I'll use other methods. Lin Feng knew after trying. With his half-baked knowledge of the laws of space, it was very difficult to perfectly fuse the two into one. However, he had perfectly copied every dragon scale. This was the key. Therefore, he could try to fuse them by copying a specific rhythm. The key to fusing is whether the copy can be completed in one stroke. If it can be completed, the dragon head and dragon body can form a perfect whole. Lin Feng's eyes flashed. The image of the golden dragon in his mind was very clear. There was less and less time. From 800 years to 900 years to 950 years. Now, there were less than 10 years left. Every copy was a wholehearted comprehension for Lin Feng, combined with the laws of space in the dragon head and dragon body. Although the laws of space in the dragon body were crude, they made up for it perfectly. Piecing them together, they formed a complete picture. Go, Lin Feng! Yin Fa Jie cheered for Lin Feng on the fourth step. He no longer had a chance, but he hoped that Lin Feng could succeed and fight for the honor of the Origin Awakening Continent's elites. Although they came from humble origins and were insignificant, they still had the ability to compete with the strongest in the God-fallen world. He can't really succeed, right? The Crystal Empress stared at Lin Feng. Her eyes were filled with jealousy, envy, and disbelief. A human that she had looked down on previously was now standing on a 99th step. Only Han had stood on this step. Now, there was another one. However, whether he could reach the top was still unknown. The Crystal Empress had mixed feelings. She hoped that Lin Feng could succeed, but she also did not want him to succeed. However, the decision was not in her hands. The last 3 years. Whoosh, whoosh. Lin Feng's fingers flew. Now, he was even more skilled and relaxed. A picture scroll was drawn with a snap of his fingers. However, compared to the golden dragon in the void, there was still something missing. However, he could not say what it was. Even the finishing touch was missing a bit of essence. It's the aura of life. How do I get it? Do I have to comprehend the laws of space? I'm still missing something. At the end of the 1,000-year time limit, Lin Feng was even more anxious. He forced out his greatest potential. Lin Feng stared at the golden dragon in the sky. It had clearly been drawn perfectly, but there was still a little bit missing. It was this little bit that prevented him from reaching the peak. Lin Feng's eyes turned red, and he pursed his lips. Suddenly, his eyes fell on the golden skin of the golden dragon. Outside the dragon's scales, Lin Feng suddenly understood. So that's how it is. In the overall composition, the outermost layer is connected, but the laws of space are missing. It lacks a frame. The laws of space frame the golden dragon. Lin Feng laughed involuntarily. He hooked his finger and completed the last stroke. In an instant, the obstacles in front of him disappeared. There was no bottleneck. Lin Feng easily stepped through the mist and reached the top. Chapter 2234. Everyone looked up to the reincarnation of destiny. Since the appearance of the wandering planet, endless years and endless reincarnations of destiny were all for the sake of selecting one of the favored ones to fulfill the destiny of the wandering planet and become the only emperor. But until now, this position was still empty. Even breaking through to the 6th reincarnation was harder than ascending to heaven. After more than 80,000 reincarnations, the powerhouses all stopped at the first 5 reincarnations. Among them, there was no lack of peak god powerhouses who could not get the favor of the reincarnation of destiny. This time, however, was an exception. First, a super existence recognized by the wandering planet appeared. Even the rules gave way to it. The first 5 reincarnations could be said to be extremely powerful, and no one could be compared to it. Then there was the human Lin Feng, step by step, growing up from the weakest. Now, his combat power was comparable to a peak god, and he could even compete with Hanyu. 2 powerhouses advanced to the 6th reincarnation. In more than 80,000 reincarnations of destiny, such a scene could be counted on one hand. There were only 3 times, and these 3 times were also the closest to the completion of the 6th reincarnation. It was very difficult, because this was the most extreme test. The reincarnation of destiny set by the wandering planet was originally set by the rules of the origin. Heaven wanted to select the favored one to inherit and control the wandering planet and become the master of the universe. Lin Feng looked at Hanyu, and Hanyu also looked at him. He had never looked at this human directly. It was not until the fifth reincarnation that he noticed the existence of this insignificant human. He thought that he would not have any interaction with him, but he did not expect this insignificant human to reach the end. The sixth reincarnation. It was enough to prove the strength of this insignificant human. This was not a promotion that could be achieved by luck alone. Even those as strong as the Crystal Queen and Tiku were defeated, but this insignificant human could stand out. Hanyu could not help but look at him a few more times and keep an eye on him. Hanyu. It was Lin Feng's first time looking at Hanyu, this invincible special life form, up close. Although he was now comparable to a peak god, he was still lacking a lot compared to Hanyu. There seemed to be an invisible gap between the two that was difficult to cross. Hanyu was really strong. Even if they were not close to each other, he could feel the oppressive and powerful aura that was suffocating. If the sixth path of reincarnation were to compete with him, he had no chance of winning, at least not now. His strength had already surpassed the level of strength that she knew, and even he has surpassed the pinnacle of the deity stage. Lin Feng murmured to himself. It was no wonder that even the wandering planets had opened the back door for him and specially made concessions for him. Bastard's strength was genuine. What exactly was the sixth path of reincarnation? Lin Feng was very curious, but he still needed to wait because the 1,000-year time limit was not up yet. There were still 2 powerful cultivators in the fifth reincarnation. Although they basically had no hope of advancing, the rules would not change because of this. He waited patiently. As Lin Feng recovered his energy, he pondered hard, consolidating what he had just comprehended. The drawing of the golden dragon had left an indelible impression in his heart. To be honest, he had already mastered the rather difficult law of space, and his cultivation was not shallow. Being able to copy it proved that he had actually solved the riddle. However, it was just like solving a math problem. It was directly calculated by putting the formula in and not understanding the content and structure. Therefore, it was difficult to truly understand it. It was just a smattering. Give me some time, and I will definitely master it. If he was completely proficient in the law of space, it would be possible to construct the entire law of space from another perspective. However, the problem was that he was not proficient in both, and it would be a little awkward. Although he had comprehended a lot in the process of drawing, it was not everything. It was only a part of it. Let's try again. In Lin Feng's mind, every stroke of the golden dragon's drawing was clearly remembered. Even if he copied it again, he could copy it flawlessly. Therefore, he was still confident. It was like holding a peerless secret book in his hand, and he could comprehend it at any time. If he could comprehend this law of space, with its power coupled with his stage 5 black vortex, its power would be unpredictable. It would definitely become his trump card. However, he did not have that much time. The 1,000-year time limit was short. Moreover, comprehending the law of space was a very long process. Let alone 1,000 years, even 10,000 years, or even 100,000 years, was just a blink of an eye. Lin Feng had only just calmed down and comprehended for a short while when a strange phenomenon appeared in his mind. It was as if an iron gate had fallen, sealing the gap between the 5th and 6th cycles of reincarnation of destiny. There was no longer any connection. Meanwhile, the Diamond Empress and Yin Fagia were eliminated from this cycle of reincarnation of destiny. Although they were very strong and extraordinarily talented, the results were very cruel and very realistic. There were more than 80,000 cycles of reincarnation of destiny. There were also those who were stronger than them, and there were also those who had better potential and natural talent. However, the cycle of reincarnation of destiny only focused on the results. Now, there were only 2 great elites who had reached the end, Bastard, Lin Feng. Boom! There was a huge tremor in his mind. This was a power that was like the might of heaven descending, and it was unstoppable. It was as if a single thought from this terrifying power could destroy one's body and soul. Even if Lin Feng had the 10,000 origin mustard stone, it was no exception. Leave or stay? Lin Feng's mind was greatly shaken. However, he had not expected that the final cycle of reincarnation would be like this. It had just begun, and it had already put him in his place. Or it could be said that this was the last mercy of the heavens, and it had given him an bastard choice. This cycle of reincarnation was very difficult. If he accepted it, it would mean that he had signed a life and death contract, and he would not rest until he was dead. If he still hesitated now, he could still take a step back, and he would still be able to fly freely. We've already come this far. Everything is naturally destined by the heavens. Lin Feng smiled calmly, and there was no fear in his heart. Since he had chosen this path, no matter what the result was, he would continue walking it. Bastard was the same. His eyes were still calm, and he did not waver in the slightest. He had come here to break the fate of the world. Whoosh! A huge circle of light suddenly appeared in front of Lin Feng. It was as if a heavenly gate had opened. Golden light flashed, and there was a rich spatial element. He could not help but be drawn into it. His senses gradually blurred. His body was wrapped in rich spatial element, and a black vortex spun rapidly. What is this place? Lin Feng felt that he had come to a vast white area. There was an invisible barrier around him that isolated him. There was a thin mist in front of him that seemed to be hiding something. Bastard had long since disappeared. His consciousness was very clear, but his body was very hazy. Dreamland. As soon as Lin Feng thought about it, he suddenly understood in his heart. The flow of time here was completely different from the outside world. It was as if he was in a dreamland. Dreaming for 100 years, his thoughts were very fast, but his body seemed to be stuck in the same place, unable to move. A world of consciousness, comprehension of spatial law. Lin Feng said softly,